something already today that BB actually speaks some decent Japanese. I gotta say, I'm a little bit surprised. I did not. Maybe.
Oh, oh, yeah, because I plan to study, in Japan before, so that's a, I take the examination. But it's much easier for just like Sharon and we read Chinese, so 漢字がとても安いです。
Yeah, kanji
Yeah.
segoi yasu.
For
But
us.
yeah,
But I think the Taiwanese, they love Japanese culture, so many of
yeah.
them can kind of speak.
Yeah, it's like we can have a trip to Japan every week since the cheap airlines, it just take like maybe $30 for a round trip for the tickets. Yeah, you can get ticket as low as like that.
You know what's funny about that is how there's a fondness between Taiwanese and Japanese, and there's such a friction between Chinese and Japanese. That's it's. I mean, there's obvious historical reasons for that, but I mean,
Yeah.
I mean, people from outside of the region don't know just how much friction there is between Japanese and Chinese. I mean, there's a significant amount of friction there, and there's a significant amount of the opposite of friction, like friendliness between Japanese and Taiwanese. And even though people think of Chinese and Taiwanese as being similar, that is clearly an area where they're quite different. So, I mean, they are.
This is a quick story because, like my grandmother, grandfather, they both can speak fluent Japanese because back then Taiwan was a colony of Japan, and since the the government, okay, the Republic of China government come here, many people thought actually they brought not the good system to the society. Even we're colony here, but many people, hope to be Japanese. And even right now, we always like a joke that, and the Americans like the big brother brothers, or the Japanese, yes, as well as the big brother to Taiwan.
Well,
And since
yeah.
we have we got the vaccines donated from Japan, they donated like 5 million doses to us, so we have very strong bond together.
You also, I mean, there's also Japanese islands right off the coast of Taiwan as well. I mean, they are very close neighbors in some sense. Okay, so enough geopolitical chit chat. We get into the big headlines as usual. The top 10 stories coming up. Before we do, open mic opportunity for anyone who wants to jump in with a hot story.
Tyler,
Yes, I may.
did you see what happened today with Twitter Blue?
Yeah,
It was introduced.
I saw the NFT as your avatar authentication situation.
Yeah, now what did that take them? 6 months?
But we knew they were going to do that.
Yeah, but look at how quickly it took them. I mean, look at how fast it happened. I mean, that was 6 months.
Yeah.
But he was talking about it. So it's a very interesting unfolding.
Yeah.
Especially now that people could have their NFTs as that. So it'd be really interesting. But I actually tweeted out the really nice, sexy advertisement for it that I thought was pretty impressive.
Yeah. So
Yeah, I got a headline if you want.
go ahead, Piotr. What do you got?
Someone on Grindr has been jailed for blackmailing some men for the past 9 years.
Oh, wow.
Not Grinder.
Yeah.
Wow, we just took it from
You also really
Twitter Blue to Grindr.
A
Wow.
little bit there.
It is Friday and it's evening for some of you guys.
I know this is the Friday edition of Tech News Around the World. So
Oh my gosh.
we do get everything here.
I was gonna say I did share a link. Sorry, Fiorta got me done. CISA which is the Cybersecurity Infrastructure Security Agency. They have sent out or recommended to various U.S. organizations that they need to prepare for the next stream of cyber attacks, which will be data wiping. So instead of hackers and other nefarious characters seeking to like commandeer your stuff and extort businesses for money or organizations for money, they plan on just wiping data. and this stemmed
Wow.
from the issues that are happening, unfortunately, in the Ukraine now. So I actually tweeted that, and I tagged you in it, Tyler.
Cool.
Oh, Peter, I'm still laughing. Peter.
We're going to get into all the tweets and all the headlines that everyone's sharing. I see them all on Twitter. There's quite a lot of them. And we will get to those in a moment. First, we're going to run through the big top 10-ish or so. And here's the first one. And I need my little air horn. There it is. Oh, here we go. From the Wall Street Journal, Twitter will let iOS users of its Blue subscription service, which is only recently launched, where you can pay Twitter a few dollars a month. I believe it's $3 a month to get some additional features like kind of a more robust bookmarking, where you can categorize your bookmarks, if I recall correctly, and the ability to delete a tweet a few seconds after you've sent it, similar to Gmail and whatnot. Anyway, so Twitter will let the iOS users, iPhone users of its subscription Twitter Blue service use NFTs as profile pictures. And these are authenticated blockchain-based NFTs, obviously, so that there's some sort of proof that you have that. And theoretically, this should allow you to flaunt with proof that you own, for example, a stoned ape or a cyberpunk, so there's that. The tricky bit is, and Amay might know, and I imagine this article from the Wall Street Journal hopefully does know, or mention how many different NFT chains will it accept, because if they continue to add many, if they're not strict or limited in the number of chains they accept, eventually you could have people ripping CryptoPunks and putting them on separate chains that then get authenticated, and now you've got people duplicating the NFTs, defeating the whole purpose of NFTs, because the whole point is that they are limited and valuable by their limitation. But what happens when you have multiple chains, and all the multiple chains are allowed, and you have the original real true CryptoPunk chain or stoned Bored Ape chain or whatever that is, and then they start allowing a second and a third and a fourth and a fifth and 10 and 20 and 30 different chains of NFTs, and one of them might allow for people to mint whatever they want on that chain, and now somebody rips off a very valuable quote unquote limited NFT on some other chain and puts it on this new one, and now you've kind of shattered the dreams of the NFT world by duplicating an NFT. Anywho,
Tyler, I think the main thing to kind of look at is that immutability of the blockchain.
Yeah.
So if the NFT is minted on Ethereum,
right,
it could only be minted on Ethereum unless someone is doing somewhat of a copycat project,
right,
where it would be done on another blockchain, for example, Polygon or Solana.
Right.
Now, the unique part about that is that they are already sort of kind of mitigating that currently in OpenSea. I know OpenSea has made it part of their ethos now to not allow copycat projects. And I believe Solana and also Polygon's connected on OpenSea as well. So I don't think you have that much of an issue on top of the Polygon Matic blockchain. But I do see your point on whether or not it could be. So how would that look if you have different chains, and on these different chains you might find projects that are similar or that may appear to be copycats of the main one, which is on Ethereum.
Right.
But it would not be the exact art, because then that would be blatant forgery. It would be the IP wouldn't be there. The IP would be where the originating contract is from, which in this case of CryptoPunks is Ethereum. And if you look at the numbers of OpenSea in terms of how large they've gotten, the Twitter Blue was going to focus on Ethereum. So I don't really see that they'd be leaning towards another blockchain, because they'd want the security of it. And as much as there's the argument about Ethereum, it is the one chain that is tried and tested since 2015 that it is secure.
I have a quick question, and this goes back, I think, to what Tyler mentioned, I guess, 2 weeks ago about Ukraine. Is the situation in Ukraine going to affect Ethereum, which in turn will affect NFTs?
The situation with what in particular?
With Ukraine, like I think Tyler, a few weeks ago, someone had said that there's a lot of, I guess, a lot of the infrastructure for Ethereum is in the Ukraine. Is that true or not?
I haven't said that because I don't know that to be true.
I think it was somebody. It may not have been you. I think it was somebody
It's
through your. It was
Maybe
somebody
it's
Kazakhstan.
the
through Twitter
nodes
Spaces. Sorry, I was looking at your face. It was somebody through Twitter Spaces. I'm sorry, Tyler.
Sorry.
The main area related to that is Kazakhstan. Kazakhstan has the second largest sort of crypto and blockchain related industry after the United States. Ukraine's is not that significant, but any conflict on this scale could affect this, but it's not as bad as if it was Kazakhstan.
Okay, cool.
All right. So the next one is from Time Magazine. Intel commits $20 billion to build at least 2 semiconductor fabrication plants, known as fabs, on a 1,000-acre site by 2025, employing at least 3,000 people in New Albany, Ohio. The announcement comes amidst a push to increase domestic manufacturing of semiconductors, partly because of enormous incentives are offered. Indeed, because the government has woken up and understood the value of these things and the value of and the importance of domesticating them and not outsourcing those things. And so there's huge incentives to re-domesticate semiconductors, and so Intel's committing $20 billion to building chips in the U.S. The next is from the New York Times that Twitter has terminated its head of security this week, and the CISO will depart in the coming weeks. Both executives joined Twitter just in 2020. Parag, the new CEO, Twitter's new chief executive, terminated the company's head of security this week. And of course, some people causing people on Twitter to speculate, but we won't dive into that dumpster fire just yet. Anyway, so the next one is from Variety, which is from Los Angeles, Hollywood. It's a trade publication for Hollywood, basically, and it's about Netflix, not surprisingly. So Netflix just did their Q4 earnings report because we're January 21st, 3 weeks after Q4 ended, and now they're reporting.
Burn. That was. Yeah. Anyway, you can finish the headline.
Yeah, they didn't do so hot, I heard. Stock down 25%. Holy smokes. The company's value just dropped 25%. And it was already was on a big downward curve like the rest of the market, and particularly tech, in the past 3 months. So Netflix reports Q4 revenue. By the way, Netflix is the first typically out of the whole series of Q4 reports. So for the next 2-3 weeks, we will be sharing quarterly reports as we do every quarter. And here comes Netflix right out of the gate with a big old cannonball revenue of $7.7 billion, up 16% year over year. Now you would think, oh, that's great. They grew 16% this year. Well, not so fast. That's not how the stock market works, because investors assumed they were going to grow more than 16%. So they didn't perform up to the expectations of the market, which means you underperformed. Even though you did well, you actually grew. You grew less than they thought you were going to. Hence, you blew it. We hate you. We're going to, and then the stock goes down. So, year-over-year net income of $607 million, 222 million paid subscribers, 30 billion in 2021 revenue, up 19%, stock down 25%. There you go.
I know there's also they updated their guidance for Q1.
Yep.
So they're actually predicting 2.3 million new subs, which is 50% down on previous guidance.
Indeed. So what our friend is referring to is what in the quarterly earnings season, the companies give the data of how they did in the previous quarter, and they also give what's called guidance, which means how they think they're going to do in the next quarter. And you can give upward strong guidance, or you can give weak guidance. And in this case, Netflix is giving weak guidance, which means they're expecting to have a lackluster quarter, and they want to lower the market's expectations. Well, of course, that means they're not happy to hear that, and that's going to cause downward pressure on the stock, which it did, and that's why Netflix is down 25%. Lucas Shaw, who we know covers Netflix rather exclusively, tweeted that Netflix shares have dropped about 24% this morning, and the company has surrendered about $128 billion in market cap over the last 2 months.
What's explaining that? I'm sure that they kind of dive into that.
Just tech in general, the big how can I say this? The shining stars of COVID, of which Netflix, I didn't, even though I love Netflix as a company long term and have for many years, it's at an interesting moment in its history. During COVID, a bunch of unsophisticated investors assumed, we're all going to be sitting at home during COVID, buy Netflix. And so when you get too many people all having the same idea simultaneously about buying Netflix, you get a bit of a bubble, I believe, in Netflix.
And I think also, Tyler, your point on expectations, right? So obviously there's a risk off on all, so that's an overall market thing. And then you come in with, like you described it pretty well, just managing the expectations the way they've been doing it, and then just not delivering on the expectations. And so they just get an over, you get beaten up in this market. If you're going to come in not meeting expectations in a market like this, with the third factor you just mentioned, which is the fact that maybe it's pumped up by some stay at home kind of thesis, right? And so but it's such a brilliant company, my personal perspective.
Totally. Yeah, it's still brilliant. And by the way, so here's what's another few interesting things going on. One is the downward guidance, or the relative weak guidance. It just, if you've been in this game for a while, you'll want to know why. Why are they giving downward guidance? Well, if you look really closely, you'll notice this because in 2022, that's this year, they said that we'll expand our portfolio of games, this is a new thing for them, where they want to branch out from video streaming content into video games, which I think is quite brilliant, actually. But they're very, 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 very new at this game thing, and you're not going to see a big uptick in just the first few months of dabbling in this game thing. It's going to take a year or two to start seeing the positive results of that investment. So it's not necessarily a bad idea after the market's gotten spooked and shaken out, as we call it, because of the downward guidance. But the downward guidance is because they're going to spend the quarter investing in a new segment of the market, which is video games, and which is kind of cool, and that could play out very well for them if that works the way it should. So anyway, it's still a very cool company, but they are, don't make no mistake, Netflix for the past many years has had a whole lot of low-hanging fruit in signing up people who hadn't previously signed up for a streaming platform, subscribe to a streaming platform. And now pretty much everyone who's gonna subscribe to a streaming platform has either Netflix or Disney or Hulu or YouTube or whatever. My point is that whole streaming market has somewhat matured, and now they got to start looking in other markets like India and going into other segments like video games. And the very easy pickings of low-hanging fruit, that era of they could do no wrong, and it was just ridiculous growth, and you were silly not to invest during that period, is now, they're now going to have to earn their revenue and get a little more creative and roll up their sleeves, and they're going into games as they probably should do. That's clever. When you're at when you've reached the scale that they have, diversified is what you do when you get to that size. You have to keep the party going.
It's also worth, Tyler, pointing out that the latest Nielsen report on streaming viewing actually has them increasing their shares. So if this is a bit bearish for Netflix, it'll be interesting to see what happens with Disney and the others.
Yeah, and it'll be, to me, one of the things to look at will be how good are each of these platforms at acquiring and fighting over the hot new content, meaning the new Squid Games, meaning the hot new content that people want to watch, and who's willing to pay for it and who's going to have it. Will it be, by the way, it might be Amazon, and it might be Apple, although probably not, and it might be Netflix, and it might be Disney. But
well, you pointed out the gaming piece is key because obviously retaining attention and increasing viewing numbers, minutes per customer on a monthly basis, that's going to be the next battleground. So like you, I'm very positive on the gaming side.
Yeah. And will they start going into music? Who knows? And
it's also worth pointing out that the tech sector has been oversold over the last sort of couple of weeks, and that's because of fiscal tightening. So as central banks look to increase interest rates and engage in quantitative tightening, you're going to see sort of people move away from markets, especially the tech market, which is a bit frothy at the moment, and sort of put their wealth into bonds, because actually they're going to start to get decent interest rate returns.
Yeah, because we're talking about raising interest rates and whatnot. So the next story is that Meta, formerly known as Facebook, details something called Data to VEC, a self-supervised algorithm that unifies the process of training a neural network to learn the same across speech, images, and text. By eschewing data-specific outputs for internal representations, Meta aims for more general sort of AI. This is a rather dry story, but perhaps quite significant. And it is very devy, uber geeky. It's about multimodalities and ambidextrous networks and stuff that will bore most people to tears. So we will skip that one.
It's just about AI being able to understand visual and written and spoken text or content.
Yes. Instead of just doing fancy pattern matching, it gets into the understanding. And this is a key point in the whole AI debate, is does the AI actually really understand what it's doing? When it makes art, does it know it's making beautiful art? When it makes a song, does it know that song is actually appealing to humans? Or is it just some kind of hard, emotionless pattern recognition system? So the next one is from CNBC, that the Senate Judiciary votes 16-6 to advance the American Innovation and Choice Online Act, which would stop platforms from favoring their products over rivals. And we talked about this one briefly last week, if you recall, and when I mentioned how Amy Klobuchar was behind it. Some experts consider the American Innovation and Choice Online Act legislators' best shot at making substantial reforms to laws that govern big tech. If passed, the bill will have significant impacts for Amazon, Apple, Google in particular. And 5 Republicans did vote with the Democrats to advance the bill out of the committee. And the committee's House counterpart has advanced a similar bill, and the Senate action could spur a further move on that front. While the White House has not yet weighed in on whether it will support a particular legislation, it has generally supported efforts to increase competition, and President Joe Biden has installed progressive leaders at the antitrust agencies. The bill has significant implications for Amazon, Apple, Google in particular, as I mentioned, though it is currently written As it is currently written, it would also apply to other large platforms like Facebook and TikTok. The bill prohibits dominant platforms defined by criteria including how many users they have and their market cap from discriminating against other businesses that rely on its services in what's sometimes referred to as self-preferencing. That means, for example, Amazon could not simply decide to list its own private label products higher in its search rankings than third-party rival listings. And similarly, Apple and Google could not unfairly rank their own apps higher than rivals in their own mobile app stores. So they can't rank Google Maps. Google can't rank Google Maps above other map products, nor should they be able to, by the way. For example, and Apple shouldn't be able to rank their calculator above the other calculator apps. Well, we could debate that. In fact, we have debated that because our dear friend Michael, who I'm incredibly fond of, and he's not on stage, so I'll go ahead and make his argument for him because I know what he would say. It's like, hey, it's their app store. They can do what they want. And if you don't like it, get the F out of their store. And when you walk into Nordstrom's is going to promote their own Nordstrom brand products at the front of, near the cash registers and all the sweet spots on the show floor. And of course they're going to do that. And they're going to put the Tommy Bahama silly stuff, in less prime real estate on their showroom floors. And they have every right to do that because it's their store. So why shouldn't Apple have be afforded the same abilities? That would be his argument. And he makes a fine argument.
Tyler?
David, hold on. Ben's trying to jump in. Go ahead, Ben.
Oh, sorry. I was going to say, all the time that it's reasonably possible to install on an iPhone, and that argument holds, and that was shouldn't they? It's their app store, but it really isn't reasonably possible to own an Apple phone and install random third-party apps in any sensible way and still get all the Apple service and all the Apple experience you expect. So I think that's probably the difference. It's such a closed garden system.
The interoperability.
So retail. Oh, sorry.
Go ahead, David.
Yeah, retail, and Cal can speak to this in great detail, but slotting fees are a big part of how physical retail works. So that quite description, and Cal, if that's right, that'd be good to know. But as I understand it, they make a lot of money off of the Tommy Bahama or whatever brand by putting them in the front. So because the manufacturers, they have to pay for flow through their footprint. Now, what is interesting is laws are great. Laws make everybody feel good, but it's the enforcement. It's enforcement that's important. So, what's really intriguing and kind of mind-blowing and just gives me a lot of feel-good brain chemistry is they're going to have to review their algorithm. How can you possibly have a law in the books that's trying to keep you from... they are right into the it was that big innovation Amazon did. The kind of the referral or the algorithm they have to refer all these other different types of items and how you prioritize things there, right? So I don't see how they're going to be able to enforce this at all without some kind of a periodic review of the algorithm in some way.
Alrighty. Next one up is that Apple releases iOS 15.3 and Mac OS Monterey 12.2 release candidates, as they're called, with a fix for Safari 15's Index DP API that leaked users' browser histories and Google IDs to other sites, which we read about a week ago, that vulnerability was revealed, and now they're issuing a new release candidate, iOS 15.3, which fixes that bug, which they absolutely should, because that's egregious. Good on you, Apple, for fixing that quickly. Well, go ahead and fix that Pegasus leak anytime you're ready, Apple. Whenever you're ready, you can go ahead and fix that one. The next one's from Vice, that OpenSea, which is a platform for buying and selling and trading NFTs, suffered a database outage affecting some services that rely on its APIs to display NFTs. Oh no! This was the worst case scenario that we discussed. Because how am I supposed to impress you with my digital Gucci shoes that I paid $5,000, oh, heaven forbid, $50,000 for when the servers are out? now I'm stuck here wearing, some $10 Payless flip-flops in the metaverse. WTF, bro? Where's your $50,000 Gucci digital shoes, dude? What happened? The server crashed.
Because it's not possible to put the actual information of the digital good you're buying into a blockchain without making that blockchain incredibly centralized. It's just technically not possible. This is just all NFTs are just going to in 10 years, or they're just going to be on a centralized database, in which case, cool, it's just called a digital asset like any other. But anyway, just a thought.
It's perfect timing for places for people like Facebook and them. We were just talking about this yesterday.
Hey, bro, all I can say is after that Tonga volcano, they're without internet, and pretty much everybody there who bought NFTs are looking pretty, where's all of their flashy Gucci NFT stuff? People of Tonga, where's your Gucci NFTs? You look silly.
Out of bought.
Yeah, you spent all that money on all of those luxury good brands NFTs, and now you've got no internet, and now, frankly, it's kind of embarrassing in watching you guys in the metaverse without all of your NFTs. Jokes aside, there is a headline, and I'm surprised it's not listed in the top 10. Elon Musk was tweeting in the past 24 hours saying, hey, island nation of Tonga, do you guys need some Starlink perhaps? Because you don't have an internet cable servicing you anymore. You seem to be out of internet. I might have a solution that might be interesting to you. If you guys reach out to me, I might be willing to, move some satellites around for y'all. So you could get your NFT back. So you can start flaunting and flossing your Gucci NFT shoes. Because God knows how embarrassing it is without your NFT Gucci shoes in the metaverse. So the next one is from the New Yorker, that inside DARPA's Air Combat Evolution program, which aims to design AI that can fly a plane and engage in aerial combat without a human pilot. Artificial intelligence is being taught to fly warplanes. Can the technology be trusted? Is the question. Very beautiful article, by the way. Really and stunningly gorgeous illustration. Whoever the artist the illustrator is who did this, just pinned it to the top of the clubhouse room where it looks like this robotic hand holding this jet plane. What a stunningly beautiful illustration that is on that topic. Kudos to that illustrator, whoever that is. Interesting innovation going on here. Department of Defense Research Agency, DARPA, has choreographed every turn, every pitch and roll in an attempt to do something unprecedented. Design a plane that can fly and engage in aerial combat, known as dogfighting, without a human pilot operating it. The exercise was an early step in the agency's. In people on the inside have been whispering about this for quite a while. Not only in the U.S., I know Israel's rumored to be working on similar things. Although I think Israel takes a different approach and they actually want people to know that they're doing things like this. But super interesting that we might in our own lifetimes have pilotless dogfights over the skies, and it's a battle of who's got the better AIs.
So just a quick comment on that, Tyler, as an XRF guy, although early stage. So it brings a massive advantage in G tolerance. Obviously, a plane and a chip can tolerate. I mean, I've sat in a centrifuge at 7G. That's not fun. You're fighting for your life with every breath to stay conscious, and you don't want to do that for too long. You can get that up to sort of 9G, maybe with a pair of pants that squeeze your legs and so forth. But a machine doesn't give a shit. It can take any G the plane can take. But then the flip side of that is that actual close quarter dogfighting is very rare these days. It's certainly in practice, most things are done at a very large range, many tens of kilometers, but it's still a huge advantage. And there's lots of things you can do with the extra space and with the extra, the rate you can accelerate, turn and everything else. Apart from obviously the potential that the AI could just do a straight up better job. But really that control, it's the low latency decisions and the high G tolerance is the real winners there.
So who's going to win in the 2049 remake of Top Gun when it's Tom Cruise versus the AI?
It's going to be one AI versus another AI, or remotely controlled drone with another remotely controlled drone.
Or will Maverick, aka Tom Cruise, upload his consciousness to the cloud and fight Val Kilmer 1-1?
Yeah, it's going to be Neuralink BCI versus AI.
I think they had a bake-off between AI and human pilots a few months ago, and the AI won in simulated environments. So, but they still need pilots to take the training data from. So, we're going to need Tom Cruise to get all his instincts loaded and into AI.
We need to ask Gary Kasparov about this one.
Yeah. Okay. Next up is from.
Hold on, Tyler. I just want to jump in there right quick.
Ahead.
Look, I know this is tech news around the world, and I enjoy being a part of this. But in all seriousness, I mean, isn't anyone a little bit concerned about this idea of autonomous artificial intelligence fighter craft taking part in combat without any sort of human instruction or guidance? I mean, it's almost like it almost sounds as if we have individuals in the military that are determined to make the Terminator movie a reality.
Judgment Day?
On the first point, yes. I mean, we go through so many different news releases where, and then we're all multitasking. So just on the first point. But yeah, we voiced lots of really deep and rich conversations with regards to the rise of AI, the almost like lack of ethics on AI as well. But I mean, it's a good point to jump into for sure, or to dive into right now.
Yeah, and I mean, and the reason I bring this up is because I know that I have, I don't know exactly where they fit in the military, but I've spoken with a number of sort of military officials in Canada, and I know some individuals in the United States, and they're actually talking about incorporating the very things that Tyler just talked about into robotics as well. And that's why I made the reference to Terminator. I'm not sure that this is a good path that we want to go down as a society where, the military is able to do these things without any sort of what appears to be any sort of public control or regulation. I'm not sure exactly how to describe it, but anyways, I'll just place myself on mute here.
No, it's a good point. The problem is the Chinese.
There's too many people talking. Go ahead.
From an ethics standpoint, I mean, this is something that we've touched upon a lot when I did my master's in strategic studies, right? There's one area to start with is the huge disconnect between politics and military generally. There's a lack of understanding from the politician side what it takes to operate on the military field. But then there's a lack of, appreciation for the difficulty politicians do because of, the civilian side, etc., etc. And one of the biggest things is about warfare. In this case, I mean, we've got to think about the benefits that AI would bring to, reducing the loss of lives on the battlefront. Look at the impact that drones have had on the reduction of deaths in the Middle East, at least for American troops. I mean, I don't want to go into the ethics of using drones at all, bombing civilian targets. That's a totally separate discussion. But purely from a standpoint of the troops that could otherwise be put into a theatre of war, AI is, a way to human life is more important than the machine. At least that's the point we're trying to get at, I think. But then there's the other side of this argument, which is if AI gets too clever, or this idea of Terminator, sure, it's a very, very scary thing. That's why it's such a popular pop culture thing in sci-fi, etc. As far as I've been able to tell, it's something that the military are looking into. But they're not going to suddenly start mass releasing, producing autonomous drones is one thing, but fully autonomous sort of AI-driven aircraft, we're not that close to that yet, or seeing them at least used in large scale in military theatres. And I would say that if that were to begin to show more and more commonality, you would definitely see that being discussed at the UN and a multilateral level, because you'd have to have a redefinition of so many laws of war and so many other things. So it's the discussion is incredibly important to have. And my biggest concern with this isn't necessarily the US. It's rogue states like the Chinese and the Russians who have very capable military industries, and them deciding to, or Iran. If you get Iran undertaking something there, it could be a very big concern. But I don't think we're there yet. And I think if we have enough time and vision, we can create a framework that's a common set of standards that would help regulate sort of thing. But that's all I wanted to share. Thank you.
Yeah, if I could make 2 quick points, Tyler. I think 2 of the bigger issues associated with this are, number 1, blurring the boundaries and the second one is the prisoner's dilemma. Is this really an offensive move, or is this a defensive move based on intelligence of what Russia and China are doing? So, I mean, those 2 sort of are co-related and worrisome for all the reasons just.
Okay. So the next article is that Apple names. Yes, David.
David, your connection.
David can't hear you.
We can't hear
He's
you,
in
Dave.
the Matrix.
Yeah, it's okay. I'm gonna mute you, Dave, and we'll circle back to you. The Apple names longtime company spokesperson Kristen Hauget as VP of Worldwide Communications, replacing Stella Lowe, who is leaving after joining Apple in May 2021. Apple has tapped a new head of PR, longtime company spokesperson Kristen. She'll replace Stella Lowe. Okay. Next is a company called Big Time Software, which helps companies monitor and manage their finances through budgeting, tracking, and invoicing, raises $100 million. And The Verge says they have sources that Google's AR headset could launch in 2024, powered by a custom processor resembling ski goggles and no need for an external power connection. Meta may be the loudest company.
So basically, they solve the Google Glasses issues.
Yeah, JT, have you heard anything about Google's latest moves into AR? Earth to JT. He might be deep in the metaverse.
It's Google's return to the.
Yeah. Yeah.
We need JT's mind.
Yeah, JT is deep into some Fruit Ninja slicing at the moment, so we'll have to circle back on that. But the sources say that the Google's going to have something in 2024. Now, the issue there, of course, is that Facebook has something in the end of 2021, and they've got now 2022 to make a huge drive. Imagine, if you would, and I made the comparison multiple times, that this can be perceived as a new platform era, similar to the PC era, which was a battle between Apple and Microsoft for desktop computers and laptop computers, which we could argue Microsoft essentially won that battle. And then we went into the smartphone era, which was essentially Apple versus Google. And we could argue, they both did great. They both did very, very well, honestly. But in terms of population adoption, we can probably give the win to Google. And in terms of revenue, Apple certainly did fantastic. But the market share wise, it seems Android certainly has a leg up on iOS. But both of those lasted about 12 years each. And now the smartphone era is getting into a little long in the tooth, a little late in the day, as each new model gets incrementally better. It's time for a whole new platform like, this VR headsets, AR headsets.
Wearables.
Right.
Wearables.
Yes. And we have Facebook is chomping at the bit and has been investing heavily for a long time. They bought Oculus many, many years ago. And they knew they wanted to be a player in the next platform era, which is now upon us. And they are leading it. And they've got their device out on the market. And it was out on Black Friday. And it was a hit. People bought it for Christmas. It was the most downloaded app in the iOS App Store the day after Christmas was the Oculus app as a point of proof point of the popularity. So the point is that imagine the smartphone era. Well, Apple did have a head start on Android by a good year. And Apple and Windows, it's hard to remember who really had the head start in that battle. But Facebook has clearly nearly a whole year head start on, it seems like Apple's going to release their headset in late 2022. Google might be coming in 2024. Facebook is just licking its chops over that headline. That they are going to take their sweet ass time. And that this gives Facebook an incredible ability to, in the supermarket sweep of soaking up all of the juicy, sweet users. It's kind of a one horse town out here for Facebook. They're running around. They're the only game in town, and anyone who wants to check out the metaverse pretty much has to do it on Facebook's terms. And they're offering the hardware at an incredibly low subsidized price, which puts even more pressure on those other teams to play a similar game. You got to admit, Facebook looks like they're in a really good position right about now, but it's not due to luck. I mean, Mark was obsessed with putting himself in this position for many, many years. And so you got to applaud the effort over the years that has put them into this position that they now find themselves in early 2022, where they're the only game in town for the time being. And that means,
but we've seen a lot of fast seconds. So if somebody does it right, they'll probably be able to compete.
If you're a game developer, who are you going to build for right now?
Whoever is in town first.
Until this is my point. This is one of the extra huge benefits of being the first mover in this space is all the developers. There's a lot of developers out there that want to build games for this, and there's apps that want to be built for this platform, and they pretty much have one choice for the moment, and that means there's going to be a bit of developer lock-in on that platform. Let's see how long Facebook can hold that pole position. Anyway, next article is from the Wall Street Journal, saying that investments in European tech rose to $93 billion in 2021. That's a lot, by the way. Up 142% year over year, which means, more than 142%. During COVID, tech investment in Europe has gone fantastic, and this is not a coincidence that Silicon Valley had a self-inflicted, seppuku, during COVID and kind of imploded. And, now tech's happening everywhere. It's no longer a Silicon Valley monopoly on innovation. Europe has been innovating all the while, and investors are now waking up and realizing it. And part of it is that the valuations in the U.S. have gotten ridiculous, by the way. And the valuations in Europe are far more reasonable comparatively. And it works. And there's a market there, and it's happening. And there's exits, and there's IPOs, and the whole shebang. It's all gravy. European tech rose to $93 billion. That's great. And up 142% during COVID, which is great. More than 7,000 deals compared with 5,700 in 2020. Love it. What else? Many right-wing personalities, according to the Washington Post, many right-wing personalities saw their followers surge on sites like Telegram, Gab, and Getter after the January 6th riot, but growth has since stalled. Okay. Next, New York Post says they have sources that TikTok ousted its marketing chief for quote-unquote going rogue with plans like TikTok Kitchen, NFTs, and others, and TikTok resumes. And this is interesting because we read those headlines. We read about the TikTok NFTs, and we read about TikTok resumes. I don't quite remember TikTok.
And the kitchens. No, the kitchens, Tyler. Remember, it was going
Did
to be
we?
if you like something on TikTok.
Oh, that's right. Yeah, thank you, Jennifer. We did read about TikTok kitchens where the meals that are, for whatever reason going a little viral on TikTok could now be orderable or whatever. Yeah, you're right. So it turns out, according to the New York Post and their sources, that this is the makings of a rogue chief marketing officer who's now being let go. TikTok's marketing chief ousted after going rogue with bizarre campaigns. Well, I don't know. I remember reading those headlines, and they didn't seem like terrible ideas to me, honestly. TikTok's marketing chief has been ousted after blindsiding top management with a series of increasingly bizarre campaigns. Nick Tran, a former Hulu executive who had been at TikTok for less than 2 years, got bounced after going rogue with multiple stunts that had sought to rope the wildly popular video sharing app into new business lines, including NFTs and restaurants these people added. Most recently, he revealed a plan, apparently without getting buy-in from senior leadership, to launch TikTok Kitchen, featuring foods made popular on TikTok. According to sources who were on a company call, in late December, news leaked to multiple publications that the tech giant would open as many as 1,000 ghost kitchens by the end of 2022. Tran had reportedly planned to partner with delivery service Virtual Dining Concepts to deliver dishes across the U.S. that had gone viral on TikTok, such as baked feta pasta. The restaurant initiative pushed Tran's already shaky status at the short-form video company over the edge, and he was booted shortly thereafter. These people said, quote, "We are not in the restaurant business, and we shouldn't pretend to be," one TikTok executive said on a call earlier this month with nearly 200 people from the marketing team, according to sources who listened to the call. Oh, boy.
Maybe they should have focused on the bathroom challenges and milk crates. That would have helped them succeed.
Apparently, this guy was taking the ambitious marketing guy challenge and didn't work out so well. Other half-baked products.
But Tyler, I wonder, is there something underneath this? Because maybe it's something like they overstepped a line of going into a business which was quote unquote promised to somebody else or something like that. Because honestly, from a marketing perspective, I can say that the things they're going into, it's not like they're dumb ideas. They make sense. Those things are connected to their business. So it doesn't really sound that far-fetched. It doesn't sound like something you would fire someone for. Like, you can tell them, like, okay, that was too much. We need to be more in this core. Like, it doesn't sound to me like a reason to fire somebody from being a CMO, because they're very proactive. So I think there might be something more beneath that story.
I agree. It sounds a lot more like a power struggle masquerading as an idea struggle.
Yeah,
He
or
probably
something
went
from
into
something
areas that don't have
externally.
board approval. I mean, it's that simple. He probably went into too many areas for what projects were of a certain size that he probably needs to get approval, from superiors, even if he is a CMO. I mean, because the CEO.
He's been doing these these have been rolling out and rolling. So why didn't they smack him down on the first one and then he stopped, right? I agree that there's probably something else going on and they could have overstepped. Again, they're out of China, right? So there could be some external forces going on there.
So, and one of the first ones that we read and mentioned in this article is TikTok resumes, which sought to place TikTok users at entry-level jobs at multiple employers, including Target and Chipotle. A TikTok senior executive on the call added these campaigns were out of line with the company's goals and gave the impression that TikTok had parted ways after ongoing disagreements about his use of stunt marketing. There were just too many sideshows. He was getting ahead of the business, one person on the call told the Post. TikTok's global chief operating officer, Vanessa Pappas, will fill in for Tran until the company finds a replacement. Quote, "We can confirm that Nick Tran is no longer with TikTok, and we wish him well in his future endeavors," a company spokesperson told the Post. Tran could not immediately be reached for comment. News of his departure was reported earlier by the information. Tran joined TikTok in 2020 from Hulu, where he served as vice president of brand and culture marketing. He also worked in digital marketing at Samsung and Taco Bell. He received a slew of awards from Forbes, Fortune, Adweek, and Ad Age for accomplishments in marketing. Yeah. The TikTok resumes thing, there's something there though. I mean, I know that's not their core business and it could dilute things a bit, but at some point, maybe it's just too early, but at some point, Uber got to a point where they got into Uber Eats and they're complementary. It adds further
Yeah, if
utilization.
businesses can't find entry-level workers who are TikTok's sweet spot with the Great Resignation, so I think it was a great idea.
Yeah, the TikTok resumes
Yep.
has a lot of potential, honestly. I mean, it depends on the execution and the plan and whatnot, but there's something in that concept for sure. And to engage businesses, to start advertising on TikTok, to find users and build, you could build the future of LinkedIn on TikTok for real. Because kids think of LinkedIn, I mean, even if you go to my LinkedIn profile, the first thing you'll see is all caps, I do not use LinkedIn. Message me on my email address. Straight up. And I'm not considered a hip young kid anymore. And I can assure you the hip young kids think that LinkedIn is like some, as antiquated as an old paper Rolodex on somebody's desk. TikTok, there is an opportunity to build the, LinkedIn for Gen Z, and TikTok more than anybody's in a pole position to execute on that vision with the video resumes. I myself used video resumes for a startup in 2007 because it was without a doubt the most effective way to check out people and have them answer questions and be like, hey, here's my 3 questions, answer these in a video and let me hear your answers to these 3 questions. And that would save me and them countless hours of driving around Los Angeles and meeting, for an hour when we knew in the first 5 minutes if we liked each other or not. Hello.
Tyler, it also shows your persona and your skills. There's a lot of video resumes have been going on for a while. I've seen
Yeah.
them, and I think that TikTok was the big platform that a lot of people are using. And anybody in content and influence obviously uses them, but and they do them so often that doing that as a video resume is on the rise. So that sounds odd that TikTok is pushing back on that. Another one is that like friends at companies are saying their clients want their presentations in TikTok format, like in short snippet videos they can listen to between meetings. So that it's on it's on track for them to be offering that.
Yeah.
And the same thing with the NFTs, this is like the it's a trend in the market. Like if you're a marketer, it would be strange for you not to kind of at least consider and at least try to go in that direction and at least to leverage that. So like from my perspective, he's been doing everything right, like none of the, and same with the kitchens, really, like you mentioned, Uber Eats, and TikTok is a kind of mega app, so I think that there's a bigger story behind this.
Hey, this
Yeah, I'm telling. I was on the board of
Sure.
directors of a public company. It's going. The story is going to be basically the CEO didn't know half the stuff he was doing. Maybe some of the other stuff that you guys like that you've seen that maybe he had approval on that. He probably didn't have the authority. It's about that. It wasn't about whether it was a good idea or a bad idea. It was he's involved with too many things that people above him who are supposed to know what's going on, who could then, when they do the board presentations, could talk about it. You don't want outside board members coming to the CEO saying, asking them questions about a new product launch that the CEO doesn't even know about. So I think that is the issue. I'm absolutely sure it's actually in the release about that he didn't have the approvals. I don't think it's about the quality of the idea.
Right.
So anyway.
yeah,
Or
but
it's about having a scapegoat, somebody like you've overstepped as a CEO or as a, somebody in the company, and you need somebody to kind of blame it on so that they don't shut down the whole thing. I
yeah.
mean, it's
So it's more like
speculation, but
disciplinary. It's
Hey,
like
this is.
disciplinary.
Oh, go ahead. Go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. It's more like disciplinary action in this case. But remember, like a lot of the tech folks are mostly introverts, so having them do their resumes in a video form might not be their cup of tea. So it might be good for certain areas in the industry where you are trying to do like build an influencer or build a some fellowship or something there, it would be fantastic. But if you're trying to hire someone to code or someone to work in the back office, I don't think they're going to be very happy with TikTok resumes. So it does have a market niche, though.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I mean, we use a key word called trend, and a lot of trends sometimes are just a fad. So just because it might work for one particular group or in this one moment in time, so it sometimes, it's just another tool that people can use, like if they're in branding or marketing, but to, just use it as like a blanketed tool from here on out. We should have like a many tools in our toolbox and let everybody make their decision on what works best for them. And then also too, I mean, the TikTok format I think that's a good idea, but doing it on TikTok, not necessarily, just because of the sheer privacy issue and security issues. I would never recommend it.
I read this article, and I thought it was really interesting because when I saw the title, I thought he's doing crazy, insane stuff that makes no sense. But I don't think that that's true. I think probably that he wanted to get into areas that weren't necessarily. Okay, baby. Sorry, my 4-year-old. I think he wants to get into areas that are not necessarily based in their teen demographic. And I think that was probably not a bad decision, but he probably just didn't get the clearance, or at least the marketing department said, no, you can't do that. We're really focusing on this demographic. So, I mean, I looked at what he wanted to do, and I remember hearing that stuff when it came out. The kitchen thing was because there were so many recipes that people are trying, and they wanted to see, like, how do you do it? So basically a channel or something dedicated to it would have been a good start, as opposed to going to doing kitchen stuff. But I think what he was just trying to do is go in, it's not just too many directions, but move away from the core demographic. But I have to say that if even one of these was a hit, they would have been like, you're awesome, we love you. So really what it was is that he didn't get quick success, and that NFT thing kind of, dropped because there was no point to it. But I don't know, like, I don't look at it like, this to me looks like it's just outcome driven. It's not, it's easy to label things as, completely crazy in retrospect just because they failed, right? But all things, the idea of like, wow, you want to talk to somebody you don't know over a computer? Yeah, that sounds super safe. Of course you'll do that. You want to get in some stranger's car and they're going to drive you places and you're going to be totally fine with it. You're just going to be like, I guess you're my driver. That sounds insane. Like all ideas sound insane, but they're like, quote unquote genius if they're successful. So I don't like the judgment on this, mostly because it looks like he was just trying to move beyond this demographic, and they were like, hell no.
The other thing here, if I may, the other thing.
Hold on, Shahin. Okay. There was somebody I'll give it right back to you, Shahin. There was somebody, I believe it was Pat in Twitter Spaces, who was trying to jump in. Go ahead, Pat.
Thank you very much, Tyler. I was just wondering whether it's a case of how the digital space is advancing so rapidly, and the technology is improving and increasing so fast, much faster than any of the other methods in the old technology system. And really, I wanted to circle back to, I think it was Clinton who raised the anxiety about, my anxiety anyway, about AI and ethics, and how that seems to be going almost out of control. Well, I think there are lots of universities who have AI ethics and various boards and think tanks that discuss these sort of things. And I think they have international networks that they actually organize so that there is a level of governance issues that are discussed about AI. So I suppose I'm trying to put a little bit of hopefulness back into the discussion today, that while technology is raging forward like it is, there is a level of attendance in the background somewhere. The trouble is we don't know enough about it. The one thing I can deliberately point us to is that late last year in November, UNESCO, and United Nations bodies are hugely effective in a lot of ways for all sorts of reasons, but UNESCO did get their whole membership to actually sign up for an ethical, what do they call it? A global standard on the ethics of artificial intelligence. And it at least it's first strike. We're going down the right road. The thing is, will it all be fast enough for all the nations of the world to join together to have some sort of ethical standard, ethical directives about how this technology can be developed in time to stop problems? Anyway, that's my little contribution. Thank you.
I want to hand it back to Shahin, but before I do, I want to implant the thought that in companies of this type, this is not the marketing person's role to develop new product categories. That's the product and strategy team's role to do that. And no doubt, if this person did this, and again, it doesn't matter. The ideas could be the greatest ideas in the world, but if they didn't come from the team whose responsibility it is to do that, whose job it is to do that, they naturally are going to say, WTF, bro, that's not your lane. That's my lane to come up with these ideas and build and work with the software development team to build those products. And then once they're built, done 6 months from now, then we start working with your team to start hyping people on it and on the marketing. So for the marketing person to kind of jump off the rails and start coming up with these hot ideas, and the product team's going to be like, what the hell are you doing? We've never had a meeting about this. We're the product team. We're the development team. We've not built anything like that. So no doubt it's going to ruffle feathers, even though the ideas might be great. And I have some, again, before I hand it to Shahin, some evidence that people actually do like these ideas. There's people all over Twitter responding to these articles from the New York Post, The Verge, Gizmodo, saying things like, this hit piece is actually great publicity for him, as his ideas were pretty innovative and seemed like pretty good ideas to me. This is why I always tell you to do startups instead of big corporate gigs. And Casey Newton said, who was another? There was a half dozen others who said...
Quick comment to what you're saying is that in big bureaucracies, swim lanes are far more important than the meritocracy of ideas.
For sure. Daniel Sinclair says, the ghost kitchens were actually a good idea. TikTok could have bumped out multiple Mr. Beast burger level concepts. Anything else was destined to fail, so he liked one of the ideas at least. And yeah, people generally no one's really damning the ideas. And I imagine even the people inside of TikTok in the product team might, on a nice day, might even admit that these aren't bad ideas. They just weren't done in the proper protocols. And that ruffles feathers when you get into big companies. Go ahead, Shane.
Well, actually, you made the point. I was just going to say that marketing people usually create campaigns, not products. Now, in different industries, CMOs can have different roles, and in consumer companies, CMOs have more of a span of control than they do in tech companies. But in tech companies, there's a product lifecycle process that you must follow. Any company worth their salt really has one. And you don't just go and introduce a quote-unquote product without having gone through that process. So, and like you said, you step on people's toes, and maybe the first time they think it's really funny and good and interesting, but the third time they might get irate and you're disruptive. Now, I think in addition to that, there may also be just other sorts of misalignment there. But that was, you made the point, and as did the other commenter. Thank you.
Sure.
This is a great way to go raise money. He's got a whole article, globally, VCs or anybody who wants to give money to him.
Actually, I'm not sure because product development isn't just idea. It's to kind of be known as he's known as a CMO, not as a VP of engineering.
So on this product thing, that there's certainly everything you said is true, but historically, product management is a marketing function. If you were doing brand management,
not necessarily.
No, let me finish. So it depends on the market and the industry and all of that. Over the past 20 years, absolutely, it's been birthed out because it's a very specific skill set. So in tech, there's there's chief product officers. So all of that holds true.
What everyone I think again is missing. Let's even assume that the product people were on board, whatever. we don't know enough from this article, other than there is a line in there about not having the proper approvals. We don't know what the CEO knew or didn't know, or if the COO knew or didn't know, or what was told to the board. I mean, there's a level where you're going to get it doing enough things, and particularly that get, publicity. You don't want to be embarrassed if you have a CEO and have it get questions from board members about product launches you don't even know about. So, I mean, you have no idea how many things internally this guy may have missed. There's
You're
legal,
totally
because
right.
it's
We don't know enough.
Yeah,
We don't know
right.
enough.
I mean,
exactly.
you
I
have to get.
agree with that. He's
Yeah,
acting like an independent contractor.
that's correct. That was, and he's not. Yes.
Okay. So we've got a whole bunch of more. We just went through the top articles. Now we've got some really fascinating tweets as usual, because we got a whole bunch of fascinating people on stage and in the audience sharing awesome tweets and headlines that they're seeing everywhere. And you can too. Just simply include TNATW as part of your tweet. That's our Twitter handle. I like this one from our friend Vinay, who is somewhere on stage, I believe. Where's Vinay today? Which app are you in, Vinay? He was here, yeah. The Pakistan drone drops 7 packets of heroin in Amritsar. A drone believed to have been taken off from Pakistan dropped 7 packets of heroin inside Indian territory near Mahwa village on the night of January 19th, said the Border Service Force. And they informed troops. The BSF Pro informed that troops heard the humming of the drone on the intervening night of January 19 and 20 and engaged the flying objects by firing upon it after illuminating the area. And today, Thursday morning, the area was cordoned off and a search was carried, during which 7 packets suspected to be heroin weighing around 7.25 kilograms were recovered. However, there has been no clarity about another drone recovered on Wednesday, with some sources claiming that the flying object could have fallen in the Indian territory after running out of battery or losing GPS signal. So the drone comedy continues there on the border of Pakistan and India. And our friend Jonathan Scott, who goes by the username Data, we should ping in because he dropped some interesting...
I invited him on stage.
Perfect. Oh, there he is. Data, welcome back, Jonathan. I have to say, what appears to be very nice work on your analysis thus far of the Beijing's official Olympics 2022 app that they are essentially forcing all of the athletes and as far as I understand, all visitors to the Olympics are forced to use this app. You could please correct me if I'm wrong. And I'm retweeting your tweet right now, which highlights what you have found through your analysis, some very concerning things about this Beijing Olympic app made by, no doubt, the CCP, which says that it prevents the phone from sleeping, as it normally would. It downloads files without any notifications, and you've got sort of hard proof of this. Disables your lock screen, controls your NFC abilities on the phone, changes your audio settings, pairs with Bluetooth devices, and that's just the tip of the iceberg. Yes, so I imagine if you can get in touch with some top-notch journalists, they should be all over this. This is really quite an interesting, quite newsworthy, I think.
Yeah. Thanks for retweeting that. Citizen Labs had done an analysis that was a little bit different than my analysis was on this project. And I'll start. Basically, what they had found was that the data was not secured as it was in transit, and it was just kind of really not best practices. But I took a different approach and actually wanted to see exactly how the application was functioning on iOS and Android. And so my full forensic report will be available tonight before 10 p.m. Central time. So I have a few people in the media already waiting for it. But so this is hard proof, hard evidence, right? So straight from the code in the App Store on iOS and Android. So I've done analysis on both iOS and Android devices. I can tell you that the device is triggered, and it turns on the camera, it turns on the microphone, and turns on the lock screen without any reason to do this. And it does collect a lot of data, a lot more data points than you actually can see there in my in my tweet. It's quite alarming, actually, and in the craziest part is that in the iOS App Store, it's the permissions and the data collection says that they do not collect any data at all. That's what it says in the iOS App Store. Wow. Which is incorrect. It's incorrect 100%, and I can actually show you when the microphone is turned on, and all this is hard evidence with code. It's there's no assumptions at all in this analysis and in this research, so that people can replicate this on their own. So I do expect it to get some good coverage as it should, because it's not right. What the data that they're actually exfiltrating is. I think everyone's going to be pretty shocked to see this.
And what if you had to predict what Apple's internal discussions are right now about eliminating it from the App Store? How do you think that's playing out?
So far, they had made an update because when Citizen Labs had actually come out with their report saying that the data in transit was not secured, they made an update saying we're not collecting any data. But the fact is that Apple didn't do enough due diligence within the code itself, because even when you launch the code, even when you launch the app on your phone, it does tell you that we are collecting data. It does tell you in the the initial boot up screen of the app, and you can see it in the background too. So it seems like it's very easy to circumvent that question of, are you collecting any data? No, I'm not. And then they can still submit an Apple saying, okay, well, everything's fixed. But rather, they didn't check the code. So that is quite alarming as well. Android, the response from the developers in China, where said their response to Citizen Labs report of data not being secure, saying, well, Google approved of this, so this is not our fault. And but yeah, I think when this report comes out, I think people are going to say, yeah, Google, you're at fault too for allowing this to happen. So, which is very interesting because I can't tell you how many times that my lock screen was actually it was triggered, right? It has the ability to bypass your passcode on your Android device. So I installed it on an LG Velvet, and then a brand new Samsung S21. So these are brand new devices, upgraded operating systems, and the data exfiltration is extensive. This is Jonathan Scott. Thank you.
So your recommendation is to make sure that you don't install it.
Yeah,
right,
yeah.
Isn't it mandatory though?
It is mandatory. It is mandatory for the for the Olympians, and that's tough. That's really, really tough. I mean, gosh, the location tracking portion is amazing too. Just how precise it is. Quite interesting technology that's behind this app. It's definitely, they spent a lot of time developing it. That's for sure.
So the recommendation is to install it on a burner phone, not on your main phone.
Either way.
Exactly. I saw
Data.
some article said the burner phone, even the burner phone still has the floor layer, so there's no use to use
Data.
it.
Could this be a standard way to do apps in China, which is abnormal for overseas people, but is normal for China standard?
Well, so yeah, that's a good question.
Well, no, because they just passed their version of GDPR over there, which doesn't allow their big tech companies to do this kind of stuff.
Yeah, and it also there. yeah, there's regulations that they actually understand that they have to follow because they have the privacy clause within the app that says that they're meeting international privacy standards, and but that's incorrect as well. I mean, especially yeah, we'll get into it in detail in my report this evening, but yeah, I would say, Cheryl, this is kind of on the edge of uh, well, spyware, on the edge of spyware, right? Just because you have a policy doesn't mean that it's okay.
Jonathan, does Apple know about this now?
They do know about it. They know about it. Google knows about it. I think a lot of people are waiting for my report for this evening, and I suppose this weekend we'll see how that goes.
Okay. So next, that's fantastic. Please keep us updated, like particularly when mainstream media covers it, and they should. And I'm curious to see how that process unfolds for you. That'll be really interesting to observe. So the next,
The one thing though is that there was a study that was done independently talking about privacy, and most of the apps are not actually compliant. They don't comply. So if anybody's doing an analysis on compliance with privacy and wants to put out like a full report, that'd be awesome because most of them are in violation, but they have privacy policies that say that they are in compliance. They're not even close. So some of it I know is because some parts of compliance are just hard because they're contradictory to other parts. But these are not that. This is not that. This is where they're just saying that they're in compliance. They didn't even start trying.
okay, next up, here we go from Katerina. Speaking of China, researchers in multiple institutions in China report that something called electroculture, and that's a new word for me today, can increase agricultural yields. Published in a journal called Nature Food, describes growing peas using traditional methods while applying electric shocks to other pea crops. So they're now shocking the peas over there in China to yield
Interesting.
better.
Maybe this is related to some sort of like a, I don't know, remedy for mental disorder for the peace.
Team of researchers affiliated with multiple
Hey,
institutions.
Tyler, can I
Yes.
jump in really quick on the last two stories?
Yeah.
Jennifer. Just one, Jonathan, you may want to spin up a room over the weekend on that when you get the follow up. If
Yeah,
you have
yeah,
bandwidth.
yeah. That sounds good. We can do it tomorrow, Jennifer, if you want to send me a
By
message.
the way,
Awesome.
hang on. That's a great idea, Jennifer, because I remember being in a room with an Olympian runner here in Clubhouse. And when during the summer games, just a year and a half ago in Tokyo, and there was some American Tokyo athletes in Clubhouse. So I wonder if you might be able to find them and ping them in somehow, because then that would get, no doubt they have friends who have friends, so could
Oh,
get.
Someone can track them down. And then to Alexandra's point, that just goes back to everything we've said, is that people put stuff out in paper and you look at these policies and you got to be pragmatic because those are just pieces of paper, right? Those terms. As she said, so many of them are not doing what they say they do, or they're just posting these to be quote compliant, but eventually do this. That happens a lot.
Jennifer, your mic's totally gone at this point.
Sorry.
Right.
I do want to say one more thing, Tyler. So I know that officials had actually Beijing officials had actually said that they fixed these security flaws. They had put that out January 20th. My analysis actually is 10 hours ago, and that makes us the 21st of January. So as of 21st January, 10 hours ago, my analysis is still that there is a huge there's a huge backdoor into these devices, and the flaw is not fixed. Even though they said that they fixed it, I have already proven them wrong.
Okay, so the next story I have is from Katerina that a DeepMind co-founder, Mustafa, is stepping away from DeepMind and joining one of the leading venture capital firms, Greylock, to focus on backing and advising early stage companies in the AI space. And the next one I have is that Elon Musk's brain implant company Neuralink is inching towards human trials. Neuralink is now hiring a clinical trial director, an indication that the company's long-standing goal of implanting chips in human brains is coming closer. And indeed, Elon said exactly that they should be doing human trials this year. As Tesla, speaking of Elon Musk, Tesla is building a big factory in Austin, Texas, and now the Austin mayor is trying to fight skyrocketing housing prices. Austin Mayor Steve Adler is carving out $300 million to $500 million in a plan to help the city build more affordable homes. As companies like Tesla move in, the average price for a home in Austin has surged 20% to around $568,000. Next is from Reuters that comorbidities, while they may raise the risk of severe COVID, may not necessarily be the cause of death. The virus itself can be the cause of otherwise preventable death among those who had manageable health conditions, and comorbidities in addition to COVID may be listed on a death certificate, fact checkers and medical experts say. Fact checkers from AFP and Reuters say there is a high risk of severe COVID and exacerbated pre-existing conditions among individuals with comorbidities, or those who have two or more diseases at the same time. The virus can still be a cause of death even if comorbidities are listed, blah, 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 blah. John, any thoughts on this development of comorbidities and COVID?
Yeah, I need to look into it. It's basically being advanced as a anti-vax claim that hospitals are over crediting COVID to death when it's not the cause of death. And on prior rooms, we've had discussions that every physician who's ever signed a death certificate will tell you they are not going to be moved by financial incentives to falsify a death certificate. And so there's a whole lot of buzz right now in the anti-vax community on this topic, and I find it hard to believe is systematic, because there are many people, myself included, who believe that globally the death toll is way higher than what's been reported. The case rate is way higher than what's been reported, and that this notion that the pandemic is overestimated by virtue of financial incentives, I think, is while probably true in rare circumstances. It's hard for me to believe there's any systematic trend in that direction.
Yeah, and Tyler, the other thing to remember, excess death, I can't talk about America, but in the UK, the Office of National Statistics have done analysis of excess death, and the death during the period 2021 equates to the Blitz in 1940s, and there's never been more excess death since then, at least in the relation to the UK. So excess death, what's happened this period, is due to COVID. There's no question about it.
It's also some of it's indirect. Go ahead.
Yeah, hold on. I'm from the UK. I'm not sure you can draw that conclusion, because given the burden that COVID has put on the NHS, some of those excess deaths are going to be due to the fact that patients just haven't been able to get treatment for other conditions.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. It's a combination of direct and indirect. So there's bias in the other direction of the excess mortality, but the excess mortality statistics certainly support the conclusion that the claims of overstating the impact of COVID is wrong. Whether it's direct or indirect costs of COVID, that excess mortality is a pretty solid statistic that's not subject to fudging, but parsing out what are directly related to COVID and what are indirectly to COVID is where there's a valid statistical concern, but the absolute number of excess mortality, you can't fudge that.
Okay.
What I was going to say too is that while there's financial motivation to overstate it, there's also political motivation to understate it. And I don't know to what extent they balance each other out or when one is bigger than the other. But depending on the region, one could in fact be bigger than the other.
So I would challenge, there's no financial motivation to overstate it. I mean, I know people think that pharma companies are there to make money. That may be the case, but they want to save lives too. So,
No, in some geographies there have been payments
oh,
associated with
right,
the number
okay.
of reporting, but that's a localized thing. It's not a global phenomenon. Likewise with the political motivation.
And I'll just say one other thing. If you look at large value-based care organizations where they're not subject to the sort of per event incentives, they get an annualized incentive for what actually happens. They're reported in the U.S. They're reported incidence, prevalence, death rate, et cetera, is there's no indication it's any different than the fee-for-service world that would be more at risk of those kind of economically driven upcoding or side coding errors. It's just this is much ado about nothing. It really is.
I just wanted to add some inside information. When COVID hit worse in New York City the first month, where everything else was shut down, NYU Langone was making a deficit because of it of 400 million a month, and the federal was supposed to help, but Trump at that time really didn't help much anything in the New York State due to being politically not supportive of him. So, and a lot of hospitals are in really financial trouble because of COVID, because you don't really make money, you lose money on COVID patients. They occupy beds for a long, long time, and you have to kind of, the hospitals make money with elective surgeries, with stuff like that. They don't really make money on people in the ICU for weeks and weeks. So they need financial support to be able to continue to run the hospital. And that's why they're getting some support.
Can I ask a question? Did the UK just remove all of its restrictions? Is that right?
Yeah, that's correct. So employees can now go back to work.
Oh, so it was full quarantine that isn't full quarantine, but it's not like you don't have to socially distance or wear a mask? Or is it no restrictions at all?
There's no restrictions
There is
in terms,
some restrictions.
but you have to still wear a mask in hospitals and things.
There's an interesting phenomenon that John Burns Murdoch highlighted yesterday in his Twitter account, and that is that while Omicron rises like a rocket and drops like a rock, I mean, it's the sharpest, highest peak of any of the variants. The drop like a rock part is only partial. And the big exception is that school age children and their parents, the incidence and prevalence is not dropping like a rock when it is in most other demographic segments. And the reasons for that are obvious. But the dropping of the restrictions, because overall it's dropping like, or the incidence or prevalence is dropping like a rock, is problematic when it comes to school age kids and the people they come in contact with.
Well, it's also politics in our country.
And everywhere else.
Next up from Katerina, cannabis use leads to cognitive impairments that extend beyond the period of intoxication. According to Neuroscience News, cannabis use leads to cognitive impairments that extend beyond the period of intoxication. And from Bibi, A model claims her partner's penis experienced shrinkage after catching COVID-19. Susie Cortez, 31, from Brazil, didn't believe her lover when he told her the virus had caused him to experience issues in the bedroom, but now she is a believer. Now, hold on here. She didn't believe her lover when he told her the virus had caused him to experience issues in the bedroom, but now she encourages mask wearing.
Can we consult some professionals?
He said
Shall we?
COVID
Okay.
caused the shrinkage. I didn't believe it at the time, but scientists and doctors doing the research on COVID virus do claim that COVID can have an effect on penis tissue and even cause erectile dysfunction. A scientific paper published in the World Journal of Men's Health looked at the difference in tissue composition between blokes who had contracted coronavirus and those who hadn't. It found that COVID can cause damage to blood vessels, which can damage parts of the human anatomy that depend on blood supply, such as the penis. The associated professor and director of University of Miami Miller School of Medicine's reproductive urology program added that erectile dysfunction could be an adverse effect of the virus.
No matter, John, yes. Okay. Is
Oh, I
that
was just going
possible?
to say, yeah, there's been a number of studies suggesting this. I haven't reviewed in detail the statistical methods and methodology of the studies, but I can only think that Darwin is chuckling in his grave.
The model said I
My
was
wife confirmed that, but I'm going to go and get a second opinion.
the guy at the medical.
The problem with COVID is that it affects your vascular system, and it does cause decoupling of nitric oxide. I haven't studied it in detail, but my daughter is writing a review on cardiovascular effects and COVID. That's how I read some of her stuff. And so I'm not surprised that there is erectile dysfunction associated with it, as there is with preeclampsia. It increases the risk of preeclampsia by twofold.
Okay, next up.
Oh, so that's actually going to make people care, right? Like, nothing makes people care besides hair
Yeah,
loss and erectile
this will
dysfunction.
make men care, right?
Yeah, like they'll change right quick from being like anti-vaxxer when they're like, oh no, wait, now I can't afford to do this. But it's interesting how identity politics and personal desires can intersect. You can push off a lot of personal desires, but not all of them. So I wonder if that's actually going to make a difference. But somebody mentioned something about with school age kids. It is true. I have not, like, through the worst of the Delta variant. The school that my daughter previously went to, most of the class has actually had COVID. It's rampant. Under 5 vaccine is ready to happen, and we're going to be like totally in line for that. I cannot believe how many of those kids actually have COVID, and this, they test positive for weeks afterwards. So it's a mess. I mean, most of the schools, they just shut down. So at least here in LA.
Okay, next up is from BB. That ASML out of the Netherlands, which is one of the most important companies on the planet in the semiconductor space, still has no license to ship its newest machines to China. Under pressure from the US government, the Dutch government has withheld granting a license for ASML to export machines to China. And the chief executive on Wednesday said that the company still has not received permission to ship any of its most cutting-edge lithography services products to China. Exactly right, because we don't want them having those technologies. I mean, it's as
So,
simple as that.
so Tyler, can you comment on the Tesla story? I think I tweeted it out on Elon Musk and US lawmakers. Something about Tesla having factories in China. What's
And
your opinion on that?
we covered
And
that.
should government legislators be telling businessmen what to do?
Right. So I'm looking for your article Did you tag TNATW on that one?
Always, always. You liked it, but I don't think you might have.
It
I
might
just
have
thought
been
it was relevant because of what we were talking about China and advanced technology.
right. Well, I remember seeing the article several days ago where it talked about Tesla opening in the Xinjiang province, which is really peculiar, by the way. That of all the places that they would open, that one's really peculiar, especially at the moment when, by the way, France in the past 24 hours has joined. The Parliament of France is now calling the what's happening in Xinjiang a genocide.
By the
And
way, I've just sent it to you direct in
I
a
got it.
DM.
Yeah, thank you. So, by the way, so in the past 24 hours, France is now calling it genocide, what's happening with the Uyghurs in Xinjiang. And France joins a very notable list of America, Canada, Australia, the Netherlands, Belgium, UK, and several others who are calling this a genocide. All of those countries I just named have all officially made the official a national statement that what's happening is technically genocide. What's interesting is that the UN is not. And one might ask why. And one of the very simple answers is because China has this Belt and Road Initiative, which has lots of development projects worth billions of dollars all over Africa, which has lots of countries. And those African countries know that if they raise these issues in the UN, I'm going to mute your mic, Alexandra. The This issue will not be even brought to the table in the UN because all of those hundreds of countries that are receiving lots of endless billions of dollars of development funding from China will not let that issue be tabled in the UN. So the UN is not going to be able is silent for a very good reason on this issue. However, you have a lot of the biggest countries on the planet all calling it genocide. So France joined today on that list. Anyway, I bring that up because in the latest version of the All In podcast, one of the top podcasts in the world now, run by one of my dearest friends, Jason Calacanis, he was defending kind of a similar point that I'm making against one of his dear friends, Chamath Palihapitiya, who Chamath said, the world doesn't care. And I don't care because I wait for the big boys like the UN, or he said, perplexingly, NATO, which has nothing to do with policing crimes against humanity of this type of like genocide, and like NATO is totally irrelevant. You might as well say the IRS. Like that's just not their lane of jurisdiction. So but that's what he said. He goes, I'm not interested until the UN or NATO get involved, and then once they raise the red flags, then it'll catch my attention, and then it'll be worth my time to even consider it. And the intelligent counter to that point is that the UN isn't going to do it for the reasons I just mentioned, and NATO's not going to do it because that has nothing to do with NATO. That's national security issues, and what as
So did he say
human.
that intentionally or just being stupid?
No, he's a very intelligent person. He's just this isn't his lane either, and he says that he goes, this he's not into humanitarian crisis. This isn't his forte, as is evident by the way that he defended his points. But it is interesting that France in the past 24 hours has joined the list of impressive government bodies who do refer to it as genocide. Anyway, it's a long point, but it's a difficult one to fix because the bodies that are meant to address these issues are conflicted and compromised. Well, the UN itself isn't compromised, but the countries that make up the UN are compromised, and that's where, by the way, in all fairness, oftentimes the U.S. itself has been criticized for having too much influence with all of its allies that would prevent the U.S. from being policed in a similar way, for example. And one might point to what's happening in Guantanamo Bay, for example. And I say that just as an example of trying to demonstrate that, there's places around the world who are saying, hey, the U.S. does bad stuff, and they're not held to account in the UN because they have too many friends in the UN who won't let those issues be heard. I'm just saying. I just want to. My I don't want
Someone,
I don't want
I
I
was
don't.
pinged that you're discussing the UN. Sorry,
Yeah,
someone
I'm
come in.
no, we're not. We're not discussing the UN. We're discussing that France just recognized China as committing genocide against the Uyghurs.
But this is
That is big. Oh shit. Okay, that's good.
Well, this is just originally, this is the reason why the original intention was to create a not an international agency like the UN. It was a supranational agency. And I understand, especially for people who are in my blockchain space, that's horrifying and terrifying. But what happens then if you don't have an independent third party that actually has teeth? Like if they didn't want to have an overarching organization, they have to have something that actually has teeth, because there's literally nowhere for someone to go if they're the country that's oppressing them is powerful in some way, regionally or internationally. Like if you are unfortunately the subject of someone who is particularly charismatic, like you think of the Rohingya, is anybody talking about them? They actually say, like, there's nowhere for us to go. They won't let us have food. They should just kill us. It would be better for us. They're just letting them starve, and there's nowhere that no country is letting them live there. So I think of populations like that. Who is representing them? There is no representative for the people that get oppressed. There is no representative to go somewhere to approach someone, right? That's the problem, is that it's about the people who have power exercising their power in international fora, but you don't actually have any place for people who don't have a place at the table to go and just even express that they have a need. Like the only good thing, I think, well, not the only good thing, but one of the few good things that social media even did was try to give a voice to people that you didn't have to have power in order to say something publicly. And I think it's
Alexandra, I'd say
so.
that it will take another 1,000 years. Up for last millennium, not what you're saying is not happened. I mean, it's, power rules the world. That's been the case. But my question was to Tyler is, should governments be telling businessmen what to do if they're working within the law, like they seem to be targeting Elon Musk because of Tesla's
If there is
factory?
a recognised genocide, which the United States government came out almost a year ago to the day and announced under the previous administration, if the government recognises that there is a genocide or at least genocidal intent being undertaken against the Uyghurs, then yes, they have every right to force Elon Musk not to do that. If the government didn't recognise it officially, then that's a different matter. But
They're
because
trying.
that, and Elon is essentially supporting it, basically.
Yeah, they're
But
trying to
I
make
mean,
it illegal.
even if there's a right, even if there's a right, for even if the business is operating quote unquote, legally, what is the point of a government at all if it's not there to protect its citizenry? Business is a benefit of having a society. If you don't have a society, it's impossible to operate a business. So I think that this whole question is separate from the fact that that businesses get to exist because certain rules exist in order to have them operate. And if they are going to disregard the core responsibility of citizenry, then yes, people have the right to, the government should absolutely have the right to tell them to shut down, because what they're doing is actively harming somebody. You can be trying to do something legal, and then it turns out that one of the ingredients that you're using that's key to your product is poison. The government gets the right to say you can't do that. If it's impossible to sell your product without it, your product cannot be sold. You are done. They don't get to continue operating, causing harm, even if it was a legal ingredient when they started, and the ingredient is still legal in some
Yeah.
uses.
But
Like
he's
this is,
not.
but I just
So,
think that this is
the
like,
US
why
state
do we not have
partner has put
responsibility to one
pressure.
another in
It
society?
has put
Well,
pressure on
Hold
American
on, Jonathan.
businesses that are manufacturing in China, and also European businesses. I mean, worldwide businesses that are manufacturing in China. The problem that Tesla has is most of the raw materials that it needs to manufacture its cars, its electric vehicles, 60% of those raw materials actually come from China. Even though Panasonic is their biggest sort of battery supplier today, the raw materials are produced in China. So if you say to Tesla, you can't manufacture in China, then that means you can't actually produce cars, because China would then say, well, if you're not going to manufacture this, you're going to move strategically this capability out of China, then why should we continue to supply your suppliers with the raw materials that they need to manufacture the batteries for your cars? So it's really nuanced. It's very difficult. You know, you could shut it down, but then you'd probably, cripple Tesla's ability to make batteries.
But who can
and Alexandra, your
Yeah,
point
I
about
want to respond to
it
that
doesn't shut down their ability to make
comment.
Hold on,
cars.
Clinton.
It shuts down their ability to make cars at a specific price. They can get most, if not all, of those raw materials elsewhere. It will cost more. That is what they're dealing with.
China accounts for
No, it's
over
not
nearly
true,
70%
Alexandra.
of
There's
the
a
raw
supply
materials that
chain.
go into electric vehicles. And they're actually increasing their stranglehold on that part of the commodities market. There are other sources, and Tesla has actually very recently looked to source considerable supply of graphite outside of China, or at least outside of China's influence and control. So that's a deal that they've just recently done in Mozambique. But it's very, very difficult. It's not as simple as that. And if you want to transition to a greener world, and electric vehicles are part of that, and if demand is going up for electric vehicles and the world is behind that, especially governments, then you can't sort of drive or enforce policies that cause a bottleneck in the manufacturing of electric vehicles, those types of products.
Yeah, I just want to jump in there. So, in regards to Tesla and their natural resource extraction for for batteries, and not just Tesla but other car makers, it's something I actually follow very closely. So, first of all, Tesla has recently inked deals in Canada for nickel mining operations to supply precious metals to their batteries. They've also signed deals in the United States to supply precious metals to their batteries. Furthermore, Australia has become a significant supplier of cobalt in order to avoid the less friendly aspects that we've seen in the Congo. And in fact, Elon Musk himself has spoken with both the U.S. president and the Canadian prime minister, encouraging both of those leaders to expedite what would essentially be a North American precious metals and lithium strategy. So I don't that it's all in China. And furthermore, the 70% that is quote unquote Chinese based companies, quite often those firms are actually not retrieving precious metals and lithium from China. Often what happens is it's a Chinese based company that owns operations outside of China. So for example, in Canada this week, a Chinese-backed firm from Beijing purchased a lithium mining operation out of Canada. And we see the same thing in parts of South America, in Brazil, in Argentina, and other places. So often the so-called Chinese precious metals are actually not coming from mainland China. They're coming from other jurisdictions in the world that Chinese
which is a fair point, but they're still controlled by Chinese companies. And you'll have seen recently that the Chinese state has consolidated its influence over those companies. So it's increased its control over those countries in the same way that you're advocating, and I totally agree that Europe and also America has a similar policy, obviously, to protect itself and to ensure supply of rare earth metals and other types of commodities that, are critical, especially in the energy transition, but also to, operating our economies.
Yeah, and so and I'm not sure the previous, there was a woman speaking just prior to myself and the other gentleman. Governments exist to set up the rule book or the playbook that business operates under. And so this idea that it's a free market, that is purely a fiction of theory. So, like, Ayn Rand, for example, would talk about the free market. The reality is that we do not have a free market in the world. We have a regulated market, and it's a regulated market that the government reacts to the public at large and sets the rules or parameters that business is able to operate within those markets. And so I do not subscribe to this idea at all. And
Wait,
when it comes, and again, just to circle back to the precious metals thing, there are far, far larger geographical regions of the world which have far larger quantities of lithium and precious metals, including graphite, outside of China. And the reason that Chinese-based firms are scooping up these operations all over the world is because countries like the United States, like Canada, like Australia, we are allowing operations that are essentially being given the approval of Beijing. We're giving them the legal right to scoop up, quote unquote, our resource sectors, and that doesn't necessarily have to be the case.
Can I just add, the woman that was speaking before the man, I'm Alexandra. That is what I said. You're not actually disagreeing with what I said. If that was what we were, that's what you were, that was your intention. I actually said governments provide regulation. They provide rules for society. Businesses get to operate within that, but their fundamental role is to protect the society that they govern. Most of them are failing in some way, but you have to expect failure because they are people. But that doesn't mean that there isn't the impetus to try, and that doesn't mean that there isn't the impetus to actually regulate people, even if they're operating within the rules, because the rules are predicated on a do no harm principle. And if the action causes harm to someone who is not a harm creator, then the government's obligation is actually to intervene. And I don't subscribe to anything that Ayn Rand said. I think it's hysterical that she used to disguise herself to get Social Security, because this is exactly what she said she should never have had, right? This is a terrible thing to exist unless I need it. This is, so I mean, and I know there's resources for most of this stuff outside of China. Most of the manufacturing that happened in China is partly because of the exchange rate that's pressed down, because they had so much labor. They needed to be able to employ people, and so they brought in huge manufacturing segments. I actually had a blog that I did for a law firm on manufacturing in China, legal issues related to it, and why it's all there. Google wanted me to blog for them, but I was like, I don't want to blog about China anymore. This is not as interesting as I want it to be. But I mean, this is something that has existed for time. There's a reason that people operate there, and it costs money if you want to leave. That's how they keep you there. So it's very difficult once you're entrenched in China, not just because you have a whole supply chain set up, but because they make it extremely difficult to leave, and because generally speaking, any rights you had, you take with you when you go. You don't have any remaining rights. You can't actually try to get anything done there. If you have an issue or a claim that remains, you can't use a proxy. You have to actually be there still. You have to have a representative. You have to be operating there in order to make your claim. The rules are very different than most Western laws, but it's very important to comply with them, or else you basically lose all of your rights. And if you don't have your outside supply chain secured before you leave, you'll have a gap. But none of this is new. if there are people who are just in the Chinese supply chain and are now surprised that there's difficulty or that they should have made alternate plans, that is on them. None of this is new. None of this is unforeseeable. We're talking at least, a decade heads up. If you can't do something within that period of time, that is not the fault of the government intervening because you are causing harm. That is the fault of
Alexandra, you
Yeah, I just
can't
want to jump in
accuse.
there. So,
Hang on,
and to
Clinton.
Alexandra's
Clinton.
point, there's a
Clinton.
few
Hold
things
on.
that.
Wait.
Sorry, go ahead. Yep.
Clinton. The Professor Ossoff jumped in before you did, and you jumped on top of him. Go ahead, Professor Ossoff.
Asif?
I was just going to say there's three things. One, I agree with you about the society, but Margaret Thatcher would definitely not agree with you. She said there is no such thing as society. There's only individual. Second is that capital is determining who gets access to those raw materials. If China as a government has given capital to its companies, then maybe our countries need to think about the way we structure our capital. So that's the second thing. And finally, I don't think you can accuse Tesla of harming, because, if it was something in my drug, yes, that's why that you have FDA and MHRA to regulate it. But Tesla is not harming anyone. It's trying to create a cleaner world. So I think it's not the fault of the companies, it's a fault of our leaders, political leaders, not to think forward.
So then,
I'm sorry, but I have to push back on that. Of course, its onus is on Tesla. Elon Musk has chosen to go into Xinjiang province, East Turkestan, at his behest. It's not down to the governments to regulate that. And I think it's also important to remember that there's two governments involved here. So it's not only down to the United States to it's also up to China and China's going to welcome it. So sorry, but that's just not, Elon should, there's plenty of other places, that Tesla could go to help improve the production of their cars. They don't have to go to the specific rural province of China to do that. And by doing so, he's essentially legitimizing what the Chinese are doing to the Uyghurs.
So is it possible that Elon is actually super intelligent? Bear with me here. And Clinton, I'll get to you next. You got your mic open. That Elon saw an opportunity where he could score points with China by saying, I'm going to open a showroom in the Xinjiang province. Seems highly unlikely, by the way, just at face value that he would do that, unless there was some alternative things going on. For example, huge point scoring with China. It seems as though he would lose some points with the U.S. However, if the U.S. says, hey, we really don't want you to do that, and then they have meetings, and he says, well, what are you willing to give me if I don't do that? Then again, he's scoring some points now with the U.S. And then if he's not able to do it in Xinjiang, he can tell China, oh, no, Uncle Xi, I really wanted to do it. U.S. is forcing me not to do it. Loses nothing in backing out. So he gains points from China. He gets some concessions from the U.S. for simply saying, I intend to open a factory without knowing he never was going to.
Tyler, it probably has a lot to do with that. If you look at Giga Berlin, so Giga Berlin was tied up in local politics, and over the last 2 quarters, imports from China of Tesla electric vehicles have doubled, and very quickly the German government intervened and made sure that Giga Berlin was no longer tied up in politics and regulation. And now that's sort of continuing the construction of that factory at pace. So all of this stuff, it's just big business and negotiation. But, at the moment, if you were to say or impose sanctions on Tesla and say you can't do business in China, then you've effectively wiped out about 60% of its manufacturing capability.
Yeah, I just want to...
And ordinary people's shareholdings.
So the first thing,
Tyler.
Can I just look at the one thing?
Hold on,
this is
Alexandra.
not. That would not be a
Alexandra, Clinton was next. Go ahead, Clinton.
Thanks. Clinton DeVoe here, Ottawa Hill Times and Troy Media in Canada. So a couple of points. So the first one is that in regards to the supply chains, I think it was Alexandra who pointed out, I agree with her. There are ways, though, to correct these issues. And these are issues that Beijing is aware of and Beijing is concerned. So the first thing is that both Canada and the United States have actually started preliminary talks with Prime Minister Modi in India about developing a free trade agreement.
Right.
And the reason that's important is because India has the capability to essentially replicate what the West depended on China for over the last 30 years. That's the first point. The second point is that, and this is known in EV circles, and that's that Elon Musk, the CEO or president of Tesla or whatever.
I've heard of him.
He has been entering quiet behind the scenes discussions and negotiations with Prime Minister Modi about Tesla potentially setting up operations in India. And I think part of that is because Elon himself has run into some issues with Beijing, in particular over the last 6 months, where there have been moments where Beijing has been quite harsh towards Tesla when it comes to customers doing questionable things with their vehicle and then blaming the company for it. And then Elon being expected to get down on bended knee and apologize for things that are not the fault of the vehicle or the company, but are in fact the fault of a handful of drivers in China. So my point in all of this is that I would not be surprised to see a big announcement coming from Elon and Tesla at some point over the next 18 months that they're going to be opening up a large facility in India.
Yep. That's.
Can I make some comments, Tyler?
No, Alexandra was next, and then we can go to
okay.
I'd like to add my cue as well, please.
Go ahead, Alexandra, Cheryl, Piotr. Go ahead, Alexandra.
Oh, yeah, I mean, I didn't think it would be a particularly brilliant play of him to try to play both sides, because that's literally exactly what Trump did with the manufacturing plant in Michigan. I'm going to get you tons and tons of jobs. Yay, vote for me. Oh, yeah, they decided they weren't going to do it. It was the manufacturer, not me. Sorry. So, I mean, that's it's a kind of a standard political play, which, you know, if he were anyone else, I'd think, is he entering politics with this? I mean, I think that we also have to remember that electric vehicles are not the end all for, I mean, all they do is reduce emissions, which is not nothing, but it's not the goal, right? We're still using coal-fired plants to power the batteries, you know, like the chargers are all coming from our standard electric grids. That is not actually changing. What is changing is emissions, which is good, but not the bulk of what the problem is. So, I mean, I think that, like, I don't want to deify anyone in any of these scenarios. I don't really care if, you know, Margaret Thatcher disagrees with me. I think she's dead, but I don't really care if anyone disagrees with me, to be honest. I have an opinion that I think was actually, you know, it's based in my ethos and my knowledge. And this is something that I think is perfectly valid. It's okay to disagree with common opinions. I feel like I've had this particular statement several times over the past few days. It's okay to disagree. I personally think that Tesla, I don't think this is onerous on Tesla. I think that the governments are meeting their obligation when they're putting restrictions on people who are either directly or indirectly harming other people, right? So if they're saying, okay, we're recognizing a humanitarian crisis here that you are assisting, it would be better if Elon Musk said, oh, damn, I didn't mean to do that. Help me figure out a way to get out of this. And then the government can come in and say, all right, we're going to help you, by, to get out of this quicker. We will work with China. We'll establish more diplomatic relationships in order to help you guys exit and establish new supply chains elsewhere, so that it doesn't destroy your own business operations. That is something that I think would be reasonable, but is not happening because there's a ton of self-interest. That doesn't mean that there's only individuals. That means when individuals are allowed to choose between their own self-interest and their community, in some cultures, they choose their own self-interest. In other cultures, they choose their community. And I think, there's benefits and detriments to both, but I think we need to consider that maybe sometimes encouraging people in the US or in the West in general to choose the community over themselves is a good thing. I think the moral imperative is a real thing. I believe Kant had a point. So this is just an opinion, right? But it's just something that I think it's not too much to ask of people. Please be responsible. Your freedom to act ends at another person's freedom from harm. Draw a line. If you see it happening, don't make someone come in and stop you. Just say, you know what? I didn't know I was doing that. I'm going to stop. I don't really understand why this is so difficult for people to like conceptualize as something that it could be a valid business ethic. It's just not enough of one.
Cheryl?
Okay, my turn.
Alex,
Hold on.
Cheryl's next.
Hold on. Okay, 3
Alexandra.
points.
Hold on, Professor Asif. Cheryl's
Professor
next. And then
Asif.
Piotr.
Okay, great. 3 points. First one is Tesla announcement was for a showroom to sell cars, not to manufacture.
Right.
Second point is if they have the blessings of China to collect data in Xinjiang, isn't that be good for people to have more visibility of what's going on in Xinjiang? And the third point, if anyone is very, have a strong opinion about made in China products, please do your housekeeping, go home, throw away all your made in China product, and that includes your iPhone.
Okay, Piotr.
Thanks, Tyler. Yeah, so to the point about Margaret Thatcher, I mean, yes, it's a good point. The full quote is quite an eloquent one. Living tapestry of men and women and people, and the beauty of that tapestry and the quality of our lives will depend upon how each of us is prepared to take responsibility for ourselves. I agree with that, but the same thing I think should be recalled, that when you have an entire community, an entire identity of people that are at persecution purely because of the way that they recognize and seek to practice cultures and whatever it is, at risk of the targeted eradication. I think that is when you can say that you recognize yourself as a collective entity, right? History can teach us that amongst many different groups. And the Uyghurs, from the people I've spoken to, including the Prime Minister of the Turkestan government in exile who lives in DC, they recognize themselves as a society in many ways because they have to band together to prevent themselves from simply just being, removed from existence. To the point about China, I mean, I get it. We all use Chinese products. That is true, but I still think there's a difference between that and, actively, endorsing or encouraging or whatever, allowing, one of the most influential people in known history to set up shop in the specific province where this is happening. It's not like it's just anywhere in China, it's in the very province where this is all happening. The other thing I just wanted to draw attention to was this idea of decoupling. It's, become a hot buzzword in the past few years. And there was an interesting article from Forbes back in December that put a different frame on it for me. So, according to US Chamber of Commerce, US total trade actually increased by about 27%. In terms of exports to China from the US, and about 17% from China to the US. So despite our efforts or discussion of decoupling, we continue to trade in significant quantity with China, even with a trade war. The other thing I want to just point out is that even with that, someone on Twitter Spaces mentioned India. There are plenty of other countries around China which, offer alternatives to them and are much more favorable, both in terms of a strategical partnership, but also from an environmental sense. India recently announced it's banning all sorts of different plastic usage and materials, single-use plastics across the country, right? I think, and if we're talking about environmentalism, that's somewhere that could look at. And then there's also Vietnam and Indonesia, all of which have seen significant increases in their trade with the United States in the past 2-3 years. And then to the very last point, I mean, yes, Tesla is doing a good job of reducing emissions from cars, sure. But unfortunately, it's only one small cog in a far bigger machine, which is, 70% of companies emit, 100 largest companies emit 70% of emissions, right? And why is that? Because our consumption, we need to have a discussion and a look at ourselves, behaviorally speaking, in terms of what we consume. Companies produce products because we demand it, and unless we change the demand, then they will continue to supply. So it's not only a case of reduction in cars and emissions, but also a behavioural change, and also looking at reducing unabated coal usage, transitioning from non-renewables to renewables, introducing more nuclear power. All these things contribute to the overall reduction in emissions. That's all I wanted to say. Thank you.
Thank you.
Tyler?
Hold on a second. I wanted to say welcome back to our dear friend Cal and longtime Greg Monterosa, and good to see you, Cam, who also did an electric car company. But there's two new folks. Everyone on stage joins nearly every day, with two notable exceptions. Brian Rader had his hand up, and so did Just Joining the Stage, and same with Laura Frank Bernard. So feel free to jump in on this topic before we get into the next one. Anyone that I just named, or we'll go to Professor Asif, who's chomping at the bit to make a point. Go ahead, Professor Asif.
Oh, I was just going to say I agree with everything people have been saying, but I'd just say China is still a market. It's one of the, after the US, it's the largest market. So if you're a company, you're going to be doing deals with China. So it's just, and they have a very high purchasing power strength. So it's the second largest GDP on the planet. And community should be seen as 8 billion people. That's the community, not a community in England, or as Albert Einstein said, if patriotism and nationalism are not something that he adheres to. And I agree with him. With people, when you have a headache, whether you're in New York or in Tokyo, you take paracetamol.
Yeah, we
Can
actually in
I?
the US we take aspirin, but that's okay. But yes, go ahead.
Insert translation.
I think
Tyler?
Laura flashed her mic just now.
Okay, Laura, go ahead.
No, go ahead. I'm just listening, and I'll contribute when I feel like I can add value.
Good. Welcome back, Demo there. And there was a gentleman trying to jump in.
It's me, David, if that
Go ahead,
was
David.
me.
Yeah, real quick.
Okay, real quick. So 30,000 foot level, because that's how we all connect on this conversation. We've got three forms of capitalism that we're dealing with. Capitalism, whether you like it or hate it or whatever, it's just kind of our social fabric. And what we have is just two quick things, which is we've got our current present Western form of just crony, corporate profit, single stakeholder form. In the 20th century, we had more of a multi-stakeholder form of capitalism that integrated, labor and all these other things. So, because people have been talking about regulation, people have been talking about a number of different things, and then CCP, that's a whole. You could call it, for this conversation, it is a form of capitalism that operates quite differently. So, the last couple of things I'd like to put is, we've got IQ is one thing, EQ is another, but what you have in your heart for other people is a third thing. And not all of that is distributed when we get our DNA from wherever you think that our DNA comes from, right? So what happens is who we are as a person as we grow up and we start to become whatever we express business wise, that value system is expressed in our business. And that's why regulations exist. And kind of Professor Asif, Margaret Thatcher, her and Reagan did a doozy, right? In terms of, birthing our current form of capitalism. So, and my last piece is on your tombstone, this whole, any kind of self-interest or whatever is not what you have on your tombstone. You have your effect on other people. So those are my points. Thanks for letting me share, Tyler.
Next topic is from NBC News. And is John with us? I hope he is.
John Madison, yes, he is.
Okay.
Yeah, yes, I am.
Thanks. So it says a study says people with very mild COVID symptoms could suffer from long-term neurological damage. Dr. Akiko Iwasaki, an immunologist with the Yale School of Medicine, has been researching the potential long-term effects of getting COVID-19 in a recent study. Iwasaki has discovered that even people with mild symptoms, even very mild symptoms, can sometimes suffer long-term neurological damage, saying our most recent research was done mostly in mouse model of COVID-19, where we intentionally gave mice a mild respiratory infection of SARS-CoV-2, and then we measured what happens in the brain 7 days and 7 weeks after the infection. And what we found is that even with a very mild infection, which we really cannot measure any disease phenotype in these mice, we still saw some significant damage in the cells of the brain. This means that even a mild respiratory infection can lead to neurological symptoms. That's based on the damage that we see.
That is absolutely true. It is another piece of science to show that anybody who's deliberately exposing themselves to COVID to get over it is taking a big risk. And that even if you've already had one of the previous variants, it's not a good idea to roll the dice and see what if your next variant infection is as mild or as bad as the last, because the issue now is increasingly for those who are fully vaxxed and boosted. The issue is not the acute disease. If you're generally good health and boosted and vaxxed, the issue is long COVID and your brain. And there were 2 publications in the last week, both showing significant prolonged immunologic aberrations in people suffering from long COVID. So there now are very, very clear biomarkers for long COVID. One of them being one of the interferons that is extremely elevated very consistently in people with long COVID and not others. The brain fog has devastated quite a few people who are regulars on Clubhouse who have given testimony to that. And all I can say is wear a mask, save your brain, don't expose yourself as if the potential for a mild Omicron infection is the only risk you're taking. It's just not true. N95 or better masks and social distancing. We will get through this thing, but until then, anybody who gets their first or a second or third case of COVID is taking additional risk to their brains.
And a risk
So,
to the
so
I
I,
public.
just wanted
I
to add
co-sign.
something, but I think Eli wanted to say something as well.
Yeah, yeah, I co-sign all of that. I want to make a few additional points in that paper from Iwasaki. Very interestingly, and this is from her Twitter thread on it. They saw that in patients with reporting brain fog, most but not all had a really significant elevation of CCL11, chemokine ligand 11. It's a molecule the immune system uses to signal. But I mean, this is a really definitive, biological marker that again, it doesn't. It's not 100%, but I think anybody who has this marker and is experiencing brain fog has to be taken seriously. And this is one of the big problems for people with long COVID. They get dismissed. There were people saying, "Oh, it's all psychological." And it really isn't. And this is going to be part of the long-term morbidity. So absolutely 100% prevention is even more important than the vaccines. There was a preprint in the last week that showed that at least for the earlier variants, vaccination substantially reduces long COVID manifestations pretty much to background, which is, if that scales to larger numbers, that is just beautiful news. Everybody who does not have a contraindication should absolutely get vaccinated just for that reason alone, on top of all of the other reasons. But another thing that I wanted to mention is there are some papers showing depletion of naive T cell subsets, which is right in line with the elevation of interferon, because that just, biases towards activation. And the problem with depletion of naive T cells, that's the reserve that your immune system has to fight off new infections. So if it turns out to be the case that this holds in the long term, you can see people who've suffered with COVID becoming more susceptible to infections in general. I really hope it doesn't turn out that way. But erring on the side of, this is like yet another reason to err on the side of caution with
And,
this.
and one of the studies that just came out last week was focused specifically on long haulers and showed a very specific pattern of immunologic dysfunction. The other study was, and it showed that pattern of dysfunction was not present in people who had previously been affected with SARS-1 or with MERS or with the common cold coronaviruses. So there is something uniquely devastating immunologically that the SARS-CoV-2 virus inflicts. But that said, I think it's likely that all these cases of idiopathic chronic fatigue syndrome that have been highly prevalent before COVID hit, but which have also been discounted by the medical community because the medical community, frankly, is very frustrated with things they have no effective therapy for. What's valuable, so we're going to identify chronic fatigue syndrome from other viruses now that we have the biotech probes to check for. But what's really encouraging about these two recent studies is that as we begin to understand better the persistent immunologic deficits, it gives us some potential targets for therapies. And these poor people whose lives have been destroyed by long COVID, and there are millions globally, millions of people whose lives have been devastated for up to the very beginning of the pandemic. There are three on Clubhouse who all had COVID in February of 2020 and who are still devastated. And so we now have at least potential targets for therapeutics that will give them some hope because they're getting very discouraged about how long it's been, how systematically ignored they've been by the scientific and medical community. And now we have both incontrovertible proof that what they're suffering is real, incontrovertible ways of identifying them, at least in a research lab. We need clinical grade testing to be able to validate their complaints. And I suspect that the disability funds around the world will be starting to freak out really soon about rigorous criteria here, because the cost to the insurance industry, the cost to the disability industry, the cost to the labor market, the cost to the global economies of this long tail of the COVID pandemic have not been factored in to long-term economic modeling, and even more importantly, have not been factored into the medical community's acceptance, embrace, and focus on this devastating outcome for some people. In some studies, now the big problem I raised with Eric Topol yesterday when he was a guest on Justin's Room of Politics and Media was, why is it that all over the world where we have advanced testing and tracking, that we're posting the day by day incidence of new test positive, the test positivity rate, the hospitalization rate, and the death rate, and there is no tracking of long COVID. And the reason for that is we still don't have a common definition of what long COVID is from symptoms. We now have laboratory evidence about how to identify these people, how to validate that that is indeed the syndrome they're suffering from. And so hopefully we'll begin to get some tracking on this. And as Deming famously said, if you don't measure it, you can't deal with it, you can't improve it. We need these metrics desperately so that we can have more effective policy, more effective therapeutic targets, and more effective relief for these patients.
So
John,
Tyler, I
wait,
just
just
wanted to
really quickly,
add,
John. Wait,
Doctor.
one second.
Sorry,
Just
Alexandra.
it's
Just
just a
1 minute.
response to John. It's just a response to
Um,
John. That there is a if I would encourage you and anyone else interested in clinical data regarding behavioral results of COVID and what is considered long COVID, including brain fog, contact Clarissa Silva. She's on this app. She's a real life friend for years. She's the person who brought me on here. So her name is at the bottom of my bio if you're interested in contacting her. But she has been doing funded clinical studies regarding the behavioral impact of COVID, and especially this really weird mix of things called brain fog, but mostly it's cognitive impairment, and it's been very interesting. She's got the studies are it's really interesting what she's doing. So if you're looking for a clinical basis, she's a behavioral scientist. She's definitely hardcore data because that's how I roll, and I would encourage you to just talk to her and see what her results have been, and if there's something that you would like to do with those studies.
Aram?
I think
Thank you.
you're trying to speak.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I was just trying to share the clinical research study data for the past 2 years that Dr. Glad presented in one of my rooms in the tech news. Um, uh, Presentation was done for 1 hour. He presented all his data. I think it's available on the replay, and that clinical data was astounding in terms of how cognitive decline is such a great big huge factor in post-COVID related syndromes. That data is going to be published and available soon. He's a published author of JAMA and NEJM and infectious disease epidemiology, head of many different societies, and just an amazing person. And his review is enough for all the different misconceptions out there that COVID is just a simple a respiratory infection. Also, it blows everything out of the water if anybody has any doubts about post-COVID syndrome and how it affects all the different organs in the body. He also concluded about the respiratory particles that suspends in the air and how the inhalation is the method of transfer of this infection. Also, how it's the vasculature. It's like vasculatory syndrome, not only just the respiratory system. So, if something causes vasculitis or affect your entire vessels, that means the whole blood supply is affected to all different organs of the body. So any organ can be affected, not to be taken lightly. And these skin related, like some people are experiencing skin related side effects, again, associated with the microvasculature problems, and pregnant females and abortion. 75% of the abortion in the pregnant females were associated with females who were not vaccinated and were admitted in the third trimester. So his data is astounding for the past 2 years, and it's available on the replay in the tech news in that room that we do. We are also doing the same room tomorrow. And next week, there will be again another COVID specialist. We are getting the top research published physicians to come and present this data so public can be educated. So feel free to check the replay or join the
Yeah,
rooms.
can
Thank
you
you.
DM me the link so that I can pin it on top?
Okay, sure.
Yeah, and Karen Barrs back channeled me with a critical addition to my earlier statement, and I just want to give it voice. The UK has done an excellent job of focusing on this. So my comments, castigating the scientific and medical community. There is a significant exception in the UK, for example, in the midst of the first Delta wave last June, established 15 clinics for pediatric long COVID sufferers. And what we're seeing with Omicron is that there are quite a few children who are suffering from long COVID. And so it isn't that there's zero research being done. It isn't that there's not one country focusing on it, because the UK has been focused on it. There are a number of researchers around the world who have been swimming upstream on this issue from the beginning. But if you talk to anybody who had early severe long COVID, they will tell you. I'll just give you one quick scenario of someone I know well. who a year into clearly, unequivocally long COVID with an MRI showing brain lesions that are just horrifying associated with brain fog and other symptoms that are devastating, was told by someone who had access to that MRI with a previously normal MRI that maybe they were just menopausal, maybe they were just depressed, and they drug tested her and then charged her for the drug testing without her consent. That's the level of denial that has characterized this syndrome for the first couple of years. And thank God we now have incontrovertible, objective biomarker evidence that this is real and that it's not rare. So wear your mask and socially distance. Wear a mask, save your brain.
Okay.
Also wanted to share the immunotherapy that Dr. Glass suggested that will be coming up soon as well. So we have a new form of treatments available soon. And in the next month, coming months, we have 2 more rooms on COVID. So feel free to join us.
Alrighty.
I
So
wanted to
So
add that there are clinics in Germany treating long-term COVID. Chronic disease clinics in Germany,
right.
which would consider probably here as spas, like close to the ocean or in the Alps, or have a big tradition with like special water and stuff like that. Treatments are focusing on this, and one is additionally
It's a bit out of the way.
cleaning the
So,
blood, like in dialysis.
Katerina, that's lovely that they're doing that. So a related article is that the Canadian.
can I just make a quick point? So in the last week, there have been a couple of preprints out about infection with SARS-CoV-2 activating other latent viruses. You remember the story before, about a week ago, about Epstein-Barr being involved in multiple sclerosis. Epstein-Barr is one of the viruses that can potentially be reactivated along with a human herpes virus. But also, very interestingly and kind of worryingly, infection with SARS-CoV-2 can also activate human endogenous retrovirus -W, which is part of our evolutionary history. But HERVs, human endogenous retroviruses, are also associated with lupus.
Okay, so Canada Post employees, meaning the employees who work for the Postal Service of Canada, may be sent home if they choose to wear an N95 mask, but not for the reasons you might think. Canada Post workers risk being sent home from work if they wear masks other than the ones issued by Canada Post, even if their masks are actually superior to the ones being issued by the company. Employees who buy their own N95 masks and bring them to work are being told to switch to company-issued cloth masks or risk being sent home. Quote, the mask requirement, like our vaccine mandates, are mandatory and necessary under direction from Who Cares, a spokesperson for Canada Post said in an emailed statement. Therefore, anyone at work must comply. If they don't have the mask we've provided, we have additional masks and disposable medical masks on hand. If an employee still does not wish to comply, they are asked to leave the workplace.
What's the reason behind that?
Wow, that's crazy.
Okay,
And
now
now there's
There
a
was
rumor
also
saying that the Beijing first corona so-called patient, actually the only thing that that they can trace back is an overseas mail from Canada, right?
right. That was
there, there,
That's the reason, but even their post office denied, because that was they were this will show their SOP has some flaws, so they denied immediately. They said it's impossible because they
Sanitize.
send it everything. Yeah.
so.
there was a woman who was wearing a P100 Flying Delta, and they made her put a surgical mask over it, which is ridiculous. But she tweeted about it, and they took her off the plane for tweeting about it.
Okay, so from
What's a P100? I'm sorry, I don't know what
Uh,
that is.
okay, so like the 100 is that it filters out almost 100%. Like there's N95, which filter out approximately 95%. So it's that much better. It's a different type of filter. It's called elastomeric, and it's reusable and fits
That was
well.
bad.
it looks
That was bad.
it looks like a zombie apocalypse mask. It looks like what you would wear if you thought there was 100% mortality pandemic going on.
I'm gonna change my PTR, so take a
It
look
looks,
at me in just a
yeah, it
minute.
looks like what you would wear in a bioterrorism scenario. So the thousands of Hong Kong volunteers.
Tyler, before you go on, let me just mention the mask that Ellie is going to post and for PTR. Please take a look at it. It costs a little bit more, but it's highly reusable, and I find it to be more comfortable, much more comfortable than the N95s. So it's worth spending 13, 14 bucks on Amazon to get a couple of these because you can reuse them for a long time, and they are more comfortable. And they are better than N95s. So no reason not to shell out a few bucks for them.
And
Did
Oh
they
my
then
not
God,
bug glasses? Because I'm looking for one damn mask that you can wear glasses
Ellie,
with.
what the what are you wearing there? Jeez. Yeah, this thing is. Oh, so are you suggesting that we buy this instead of N95 and everyone wears these, John?
That
Wow.
They're so
it's better
cool, like
protection.
Gundam.
we
Oh no,
could
I
have
understand.
ended the pandemic week 2 if everyone had done that. But anyway, the thousands of Hong Kong volunteers offered to adopt hamsters amid Hong Kong's threats to kill all the hamsters for fear that they have COVID. So now there's hamster humanitarians
Real.
offering to adopt all of the soon to be killed hamsters. The next one is that Prada and Adidas launch NFTs on Polygon. And this goes back to the first article of the day about Twitter adding NFTs to Twitter so that you can highlight your profile, where I made the half joke that there's going to be other chains like Polygon that has Prada and Adidas, and then you're going to have other brands on other chains, and other brands on other chains, and other brands on other chains, and eventually you'll have chains that really don't give a shit and let you put anything, and you'll be able to put copies of these Prada products on some other chain that Twitter accepts, and now you'll have two people with the same image, and then your whole concept turns into dog shit instantly. So it was fun playing.
And their own risk because it may disappear when you want to use it in the metaverse.
Right, as everyone in Tonga now knows. So, by the way, the next article is from Bloomberg that PlayStation creator Kutaragi is snubbing the metaverse, saying that he's shrugging off the metaverse as the tech industry's next big undertaking, and that head-mounted displays, it's all a bunch of fahooey. That's coming from the PlayStation creator, or whatever that word's. And then the next one is that hours after Microsoft says it's buying Activision, the U.S. government says, or the U.S. government's Department of Justice and the Federal Trade Commission, the FTC, launched a joint review of antitrust merger guidelines. So that one might have a hard time passing. And
Well,
Elon,
the irony of that is that, as you mentioned at the start of today's room, Facebook has such a big jump on everybody. If you were the FTC, you would think do anything you can to bring in more players who have the resources to create an ecosystem of walled gardens, because that's what they're going to be for a long time, is walled gardens, so that we don't have a monopoly based upon the first to market with heavy funding from one company. So it would be ironic if the FTC were to put the brakes on the Microsoft acquisition of Activision as an intentional way of reducing restraint of trade. That would be pretty backwards.
alrighty. Well, that brings us to the end of another Tech News Around the World today for Friday, and we may or may not, as you know, meet on Saturday. Sometimes we do, sometimes we don't, But we'll see what happens. I put it on the calendar, but no guarantees. And thank you to everybody, and good to see you, Cal, and good to see you.
Yeah, see you later.
Yeah.
Great to hear all the stories.
Yep.
Can I just say just one thing? The one thing is the experience. I tested out both Twitter Spaces and here. I like that you do both rooms, but the experience on here is so much better. Like on Clubhouse. Sorry, I'm on Clubhouse right now. Just from both of them. I'm a big Twitter Spaces fan.
Yep.
I just like for other reasons, but just the experience. I'm sure others have their own view on it, but it feels so cool here. The community's there, everyone's chatting. It's a very, very, very different experience here. It's kind of interesting, but I'm glad you're doing it in both places to include people.
Yeah.
So thanks for doing that, Tyler.
Are you
one
are you
interesting
saying
thing.
Twitter's going to acquire Clubhouse? Just kidding.
Who knows?
They offered them $4 billion, and Clubhouse turned it down. When I made a comment earlier that our friend Michael Simpson, I took the liberty of expressing what I know would have been his view on the issue of the Apple app stores. When I said, if I used the Target scenario of like stores are able to do what they. I used the Nord.
Say, like, you don't want to use it, get out, right? That's
right.
what you should say.
Right.
Yeah.
So BB took the liberty of clipping that quote and sharing it with Michael, and Michael responded, "He's not wrong. That's exactly what I would say." So, glad to know we can still chat.
He bring you some Subway now.
But thank you for doing that, BB, and glad to know Michael approved of my positioning of his point. So thank you to everybody. Have a wonderful weekend. Hopefully see you tomorrow. And if not, have a wonderful, wonderful, wonderful weekend. And we'll see you next time.
Thanks,
Thank
Tyler.
you.
Bye,
Hey,
guys.
thanks,
Everybody.
Tyler.
Thanks,
Thanks,
Cheryl.
Val. Thanks,
Thanks,
everyone.
Kyle.
Thank you.
Kyle, yesterday
Stay
Ellen might
safe.
need your help too. Yeah.
Remember to do your housekeeping.
Yeah.